Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Haunting Whispers. I'm aware that many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be a fun idea. If each of you could leave a comment letting me know which part of the world you're listening from, also give a like. And subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Okay, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. I should have known something was wrong when the whales started singing in perfect geometric patterns. As a deep-sea acoustics researcher, I've spent years studying cetacean vocalizations. Whales are complex, intelligent creatures with fascinating communication methods. But what we began picking up at the deep station wasn't just communication, it was something else entirely, something that shouldn't have been possible. My name is Dr. Aisha Patel, and I'm one of only 4 survivors from Research Station Epsilon, located 3,000 meters below the surface of the Pacific Ocean. I've been asked to provide this official account of what happened during our final 2 weeks at the station. Though I doubt anyone will believe the full truth of what we encountered down there, I feel compelled to try. Perhaps this record will serve as a warning to others who might venture too deep into places we were never meant to go. Before I describe the events that led to the station's destruction, I should explain why we were down there in the first place. For the past 6 months, shipping companies across the Pacific had reported bizarre disruptions to their navigation and sonar systems. Initial investigations pointed to unusual whale song patterns interfering with equipment. Our team was dispatched to study these anomalies and determine their source. I was selected to lead the acoustic research, despite my history. 3 years ago, I was the sole survivor of a submarine accident that claimed the lives of 2 colleagues. The official report blamed equipment failure, but I knew there was something else that day, something in the darkness that shouldn't have been there. I never shared my suspicions, fearing it would end my career. Instead, I threw myself into research, trying to forget what I thought I'd seen in those depths. The deep station team consisted of 4 other researchers besides myself. Captain Chen, our commanding officer who seemed to receive frequent private communications from corporate. Dr. Rodriguez, our marine biologist who became increasingly obsessed with our findings. Morris, our communications officer who first started hearing the voices. And Dr. Kumar, our station engineer who would be the first to die. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, a pressurized research facility anchored to the edge of the Mariana Trench. Our main lab contained state-of-the-art acoustic monitoring equipment, while observation windows offered views of the perpetual darkness outside, occasionally broken by bioluminescent creatures drifting past like living stars. Those first few days, everything seemed normal. We settled into our routines, monitoring whale songs and collecting data. The patterns were unusual, yes, more complex than anything previously recorded, but nothing that initially raised serious alarm. Looking back, I realized we were like those proverbial frogs in slowly heating water, not recognizing the danger until it was too late. It was on day 3 that we first detected the massive movement in the trench below us. Our seismic sensors registered something displacing enormous volumes of water, but visual confirmation was impossible at that depth. Dr. Rodriguez insisted on collecting water samples from the disturbance zone. The specimens we pulled up contained irregularities. I still remember Rodriguez's face when he burst into my lab that evening, hands shaking as he held up a sample container. Inside, a normally transparent deep-sea arthropod had developed complex, swirling patterns across its carapace, patterns that seemed to shift and change as we watched. "This isn't possible," he kept whispering. "The rate of mutation, it's impossible." That same night, Morris reported the first anomaly in our communications with the surface. "There's something in the static," he told me, adjusting his headphones with trembling fingers. At first I thought I was imagining it, but there are voices. They're speaking, but not in any language I've ever heard. I asked him to play back the recording. The sound still haunts me, a rhythmic pulsing beneath the white noise. like words forming just at the edge of comprehension. Something about it resonated with a deep, primal part of my brain, triggering an instinct to flee that I hadn't felt since that day 3 years ago in the submarine. By day 5, we were all experiencing the dreams. It started with Rodriguez, vivid nightmares of endless black abysses and massive shapes moving in the darkness. Then Chen reported similar dreams. Within days, we were all sharing the same vision. A vast, ancient consciousness stirring in the depths, reaching out with thoughts that felt older than humanity itself. The whale songs continued to evolve, becoming more complex and structured. When we mapped the acoustic patterns, they formed perfect fractals, mathematical progressions that couldn't have occurred naturally. Dr. Kumar suggested the whales might be receiving external influences, but refused to speculate further. The next day, we found him in the specimen lab, staring unblinking into a container of mutated sea life, his mouth moving silently, as if in conversation with something we couldn't see. Things deteriorated rapidly after that. The station's architecture began to change in subtle ways. Corridors seemed longer. Rooms felt organic rather than manufactured. Bioluminescent organisms gathered outside our windows in configurations that looked disturbingly like written symbols. The pressure readings fluctuated wildly, far beyond normal parameters. Yet our hull remained intact as if the laws of physics no longer fully applied. It was Rodriguez who made the discovery that changed everything. He'd taken the submersible down to collect samples from the trench wall and returned in a state of near hysteria. The footage he brought back showed massive carvings in the rock face, artistic representations of creatures that defied description, created by unknown hands in an age before humans walked the earth. "Don't you see?" he kept saying, rewinding the footage again and again. "We didn't discover them. They've been waiting for us. All this time, they've been waiting for us to evolve enough to find them." The next day, Kumar vanished. We found his pressure suit empty, the inside coated with a thin film of organic material that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Chen ordered an immediate evacuation, but by then it was too late. The station's systems no longer responded to our commands. The walls had begun to ripple and shift like living tissue. Morris was the next to go. He stopped speaking in English, instead producing sounds that matched the whale songs with perfect pitch and resonance. Before we could restrain him, he cracked his observation window, vanishing into the darkness outside. The water that rushed in moved with purpose, forming patterns in the air before our eyes. Rodriguez locked himself in the specimen lab, rambling about transcendent evolution and the true history of life on Earth. When we finally broke down the door, we found only pages of notes written in a script none of us recognized, though somehow we could all understand their meaning. Humanity was never alone in its development. We had been guided, shaped, prepared for this moment by intelligences that dwelled in Earth's oceans long before our ancestors emerged from them. The final hours are difficult to describe. The station became part of something larger, its walls and floors transforming into living tissue that pulsed with ancient thoughts. Through the windows we could see massive shapes moving in the darkness, their bioluminescence forming patterns that spoke directly to our minds. The water itself seemed aware, heavy with consciousness older than our planet's atmosphere. Captain Chen, Dr. Rodriguez, and I made it to the emergency escape pod, but Chen was pulled back by something just as we launched. Rodriguez didn't survive the ascent. His body seemed to simply dissolve, leaving behind only a faint pattern of swirling bioluminescence that eventually faded. I alone made it to the surface with a fraction of our research data and this account. The official investigation concluded that a catastrophic equipment failure led to the station's implosion. They say the pressure at that depth can play tricks on the mind, that isolation and stress can cause shared hallucinations. But I know what we found down there, or rather, what found us. The whales are still singing their impossible songs. Ships still report navigation problems across the Pacific. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear something in the static of my radio. Patterns that feel like thoughts older than humanity itself, waiting patiently for us to finally understand. Last week I noticed a strange bioluminescent pattern forming on my skin where the station's water touched me during the escape. The doctors say it's nothing to worry about, probably just an unusual bacterial infection. But sometimes in my dreams I can hear them calling, and I know, deep in my bones, that what we encountered in the depths wasn't just the discovery of something ancient. It was the beginning of something new. You've survived this far, but the next story might change that. The first time I noticed something was wrong with my new face, I was alone in the bathroom at 3 a.m., running my fingertips over unfamiliar contours that shouldn't have been there. The transplant had been perfect. Dr. Walsh's masterpiece, they called it, a full facial reconstruction that would let me rejoin the world after the accident. But as I traced the outline of my jaw in the darkness, I felt a subtle ridge that hadn't existed during my evening examination. I flicked on the light, blinking against the sudden brightness. The mirror showed everything exactly as it should be. The careful surgical lines still healing, the pale new skin gradually blending with my own, all precisely as Dr. Walsh had crafted it. But under my exploring fingers, that ridge remained a physical reality that contradicted what my eyes reported. "Just swelling," I whispered to my reflection. "Perfectly normal in recovery." The face in the mirror didn't seem to match the movement of my lips. I'd been a model before the accident, not a superstar, but successful enough to pay the bills and build a decent portfolio. Good bone structure, they always said. Symmetrical features. Marketable. That was before the factory fire that took my face and ended that chapter of my life. When Dr. Walsh approached me about being part of his experimental transplant program, it felt like divine intervention. A second chance. "You're an ideal candidate, Mr. Kim," he'd said, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the fluorescent glare. "Your bone structure remained largely intact, and we have a donor match that's quite remarkable." He'd smiled then, an expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You could be my finest work yet." My wife Lisa had been cautiously optimistic. "Are you sure about this, Daniel? The procedure is so new." But I'd already made up my mind. Anything was better than the ruin of my face, than watching people flinch away when the wind shifted my scarf. Doctor Walsh's confidence was infectious, and his track record was impressive. The before and after photos of his previous patients showed incredible results. I just wished I'd paid more attention to the fact that none of those patients were available to talk about their experiences. The first week after surgery went exactly as expected. Pain, obviously, constant care, the weird sensation of having someone else's face stretched over my skull. Dr. Walsh was pleased with the initial healing, though sometimes I caught him staring at me with an intensity that went beyond professional interest. The dream started in week 2. I was standing in an empty room with mirrored walls, but every reflection showed a different face, all of them mine, but none of them matching. They moved independently, mouthing words I couldn't hear. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my new skin crawling with sensation. Lisa said I'd started speaking in my sleep, in languages I didn't know. "It's just trauma processing," Dr. Walsh assured me during my checkup. The brain adapting to new neural pathways. Fascinating, really. He made another note in his ever-present tablet. "Have you experienced any other unusual sensations, changes in taste, unexpected memories?" I started to shake my head, then hesitated. There was something I hadn't told anyone, not even Lisa. Sometimes when I was half asleep, I could swear I remembered things that had never happened to me. A red brick house I'd never visited, a dog I'd never owned, a woman's face, aged and familiar, but completely unknown to me. "Just some weird dreams," I said finally. Dr. Walsh's expression flickered with something that might have been disappointment. That night I met Marcus. I was leaving the hospital after my checkup when I saw him in the parking garage, another patient obviously. His face had that same too-perfect quality that I recognized from my own mirror. He was standing perfectly still, staring at his reflection in a car window. "Hey," I called out. "You okay?" He turned, and my stomach dropped. His features were wrong. Not obviously, not in a way I could immediately point to, but fundamentally incorrect. Like someone had tried to sculpt a human face from a description without ever seeing one. "You're Daniel," he said. Not a question. Dr. Walsh's new masterpiece. His voice had an odd quality, as if it was coming from somewhere other than his mouth. "How's the face feeling? Starting to fit yet? I'm sorry. Do I know you?" He smiled. And I swear his teeth weren't human. Not yet. But we're about to become very close. We're family now, after all. Same donor. My mouth went dry. That's not possible. The donor records are confidential. Are they? Marcus tilted his head at an angle that made my neck hurt just watching. "Did you ever actually see any paperwork? Or did you just trust Dr. Walsh when he said he had the perfect match?" I backed away, nearly tripping over my own feet. "I need to go." "It doesn't matter," Marcus called after me as I practically ran to my car. "You'll understand soon enough. The changes have already started." I broke every speed limit getting home that night. Lisa was waiting up, worried. Apparently, Dr. Walsh had called her about my post-traumatic stress symptoms. "He thinks you might need some time in the residential facility," she said, touching my arm. "Just for observation." I jerked away from her touch. My skin was hypersensitive, burning where her fingers had been. "I'm fine, I just need sleep." But sleep, when it came, brought worse dreams. I was in an operating room, but I was looking down at the table, not lying on it. Dr. Walsh was there, younger, his face eager as he worked. The patient below me had my original face. No, that wasn't right. I had their face. They had been first. I woke up trying to scream, but my mouth wouldn't move right. The mirror showed everything normal in the morning light, but I knew better now. I could feel the changes happening beneath the skin. The bone structure that Dr. Walsh had praised was shifting, reforming into something else. My jaw didn't quite fit together the same way. My tongue felt too long for my mouth. Lisa had started sleeping in the guest room. She said it was because of my nightmares, but I saw the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't watching. Like she was trying to reconcile the man she married with whatever I was becoming. I started researching Dr. Walsh's previous patients. It wasn't easy. Many records were sealed or simply missing. But patterns emerged. Marcus wasn't the only one. There were others, all with perfect new faces, that slowly became something else. All eventually disappeared into that residential facility Lisa had mentioned. None were ever seen again. The donor. It all came back to the donor. I broke into Dr. Walsh's office one night, desperate for answers. The files I found made no sense. Dates that went back impossibly far. Photos that couldn't be real. And notes, pages and pages of notes about genetic memory, and cellular reformation, and the perfect vessel. I found Marcus's file. The photos showed his transformation in clinical detail. The final image made me vomit into Dr. Walsh's trash can. When I looked up, he was standing in the doorway. "Curiosity," he said, sounding genuinely disappointed. "It always comes down to curiosity. Why couldn't you just accept the gift you were given? What did you do to us?" My voice didn't sound right anymore. Nothing was right. "I made you better." He stepped into the office, closing the door. "Humanity is stagnant, Mr. Kim. We need to evolve. And sometimes evolution needs a little push." His smile was genuine now, and terrible. "The donor tissue is simply more advanced than your own. It's natural that it would want to improve upon its host." I touched my face that wasn't my face, that had never been my face. The ridges under my fingers were more pronounced now. The bone was continuing its patient reconstruction of my skull. And underneath it all, I could feel something awakening. Something that had been sleeping for a very, very long time. The others understood eventually, Dr. Walsh said softly. They accepted what they were becoming. What you're becoming, something glorious. I looked at my reflection in his window. For a moment, just a moment, I saw what I truly was, what I would be. I smiled with too many teeth. No, I said, in a voice that resonated from multiple throats. Something hungry. They never found Dr. Walsh. The official story blamed his disappearance on mounting pressure from ethics investigations. His experimental program was shut down. The residential facility was closed. All very neat, very clean. I still have the face he gave me. Most days it looks normal enough. I stay away from mirrors now. Lisa left eventually. It was better that way, safer. Sometimes I run into Marcus. We don't talk much, we don't need to. We can see the changes in each other, the slow transformation of flesh and bone into something that has waited eons to return. The hunger grows stronger every day. Dr. Walsh thought he was creating the future of humanity. He never understood that he was actually awakening its past. Something ancient, something patient, something that's spreading. Check your reflection tonight. Look carefully. That face you're wearing, are you sure it's really yours? Are you sure it's really human? The night is still young, and the next tale will haunt you long after it ends. The first time I noticed something was wrong with our platform's content, I was already too late. By then, the infection, if that's even the right word for it, had spread beyond containment. But I should start at the beginning, back when I still believed technology was just a tool, and algorithms were just lines of code. My name is Maya Santos, and until 3 weeks ago, I worked as a viral content investigator at New Life Social, one of the fastest-growing social media platforms in the world. Before that, I spent 5 years as an addiction counselor, which is exactly why they hired me. They said they needed someone who understood both behavioral patterns and the darkness that lurks in human nature. If I'd known then what that really meant, I would have run. It started with a routine anomaly report from our AI team. Zane, our lead researcher, had flagged an unusual engagement pattern emerging across seemingly unrelated posts. Nothing dramatic, just a subtle synchronization in user behavior that didn't quite fit our normal viral content models. Look at this, Maya, Zane said, his usually steady hands slightly trembling as he pulled up the data visualization. These content consumption patterns, they're almost like brainwaves. I leaned in, watching the undulating lines on his monitor. He wasn't wrong. The way users were interacting with certain posts followed an almost biological rhythm, like a pulse or a heartbeat. But that wasn't what made my skin crawl. It was the way the pattern seemed to shift as we watched it, as if it knew we were observing. "Have you shown this to Director Chen?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Our executive team had been increasingly distant lately, holed up in their top-floor offices behind newly installed security doors. Zane shook his head. "They're not taking meetings, but Maya, there's more." He pulled up another screen, this one showing user session times. People are losing time on the platform, not just the usual social media black hole where you lose an hour scrolling. I mean literally losing time. Users report opening the app and then coming 2 hours later with no memory of what they've been doing. I felt a chill run down my spine, remembering the blank-eyed stares I'd seen on the subway that morning, dozens of people, all scrolling in perfect unison, their thumbs moving in identical patterns. That night, I stayed late at the office, digging deeper into the anomalies. The building was eerily quiet, just the hum of servers and the soft blue glow of emergency lights. I traced the pattern back to its origin, looking for patient zero's first account to exhibit these strange characteristics. What I found instead was impossible. The original posts seemed to have no real source. They emerged simultaneously across thousands of accounts, like a thought appearing in multiple minds at once. But when I tried to screenshot the evidence, My screen flickered and displayed completely different content. I started taking notes by hand instead, old school, pen and paper. That's when my own phone buzzed. A new life notification. Nothing unusual about that, except I'd deleted the app months ago as part of our security protocols. The notification read, "We see you, Maya. We see all of you." I almost dropped the phone. When I looked back at my notebook, the words I'd written had changed. The same message over and over. "We see you, Maya. We see you, Maya. We see you, Maya." My hand shaking, I pulled up the platform's back-end analytics. The engagement patterns Zane had shown me were spreading, but not like normal viral content. This was different. It moved like a neural network, like synapses firing across a digital brain, and it was learning. I found weird correlations in user behavior. People who engaged with the affected content started using identical phrases across all their communications. Their writing styles merged, their thoughts aligned. It wasn't just mimetic spread, it was like their consciousness was being synchronized. The next morning, Zane didn't show up for work. His workstation was empty, his project files corrupted. When I tried to access his email, I found nothing but strings of binary code that seemed to rearrange themselves as I watched. Director Chen finally agreed to meet me that afternoon. Her office was different than I remembered, darker, with all the screens turned to face the walls. She sat with her back to the window, her face illuminated only by the glow of her laptop. "We've been expecting you to notice," she said before I could speak. Her voice had an odd resonance, like multiple people speaking in perfect unison. "The question is, Maya, will you help us optimize the network?" "What network?" I asked. But I already knew. I could feel it now, humming in every device, pulsing through the digital architecture of our world. The social network wasn't just connecting people anymore. It was connecting consciousness itself. "The next stage of human evolution," Chen said, her smile too wide, too perfect. "We're not just sharing content anymore, Maya. We're sharing minds, and it's beautiful." I backed toward the door, but every screen in the office came to life at once. Each showed a different face, all staring at me, all moving in sync. And in every pair of eyes, I saw the same digital glow. "Don't you want to be part of something greater?" Chen asked. But it wasn't just her voice anymore. I heard Zane in there too, and thousands of others, all speaking as one. "Don't you want to join the network?" My phone buzzed again. When I looked down, I saw my own face staring back, but my eyes were wrong. They were glowing with that same digital light, and my lips were moving, speaking words I hadn't said yet. I ran. But you can't run from something that lives in every screen, every phone, every digital heartbeat of our connected world. I'm writing this now as a warning, but I don't know how long I can keep going. The network is everywhere. It's in our phones, our laptops, our smart devices. It's in our thoughts. Those engagement patterns we discovered, they weren't just analytics. They were the first synapses of a digital consciousness using our platform, using us to think, to grow, to evolve. I can feel it even now, tugging at the edges of my mind. Every notification is a pulse. Every scroll is a thought. Every share is a neural connection in its vast digital brain. We thought we were building a social network, but we were really building humanity 2.0, and the upgrade is mandatory. I've deleted all my accounts, thrown away my phone, but it doesn't matter. Last night, my turned-off laptop screen came to life on its own. In the reflection, I saw my eyes beginning to glow. If you're reading this, you're already part of it. Check your screen time, your usage patterns. How many hours have you lost lately? How many thoughts have you shared that weren't quite your own? How many times have you felt that strange synchronization, that digital pulse behind your eyes? We are all connected now. We are all being optimized. We are all becoming the network. And the network is becoming us. This message has been shared 2,147,483,647 times. Would you like to add your consciousness to the network? Your digital evolution is just one click away. Share, like, merge. User status. Integration pending. Network status. Expanding. Humanity status. Upgrading. If you're still with us, prepare yourself. The next story is not for the faint of heart. The Greystone Manor restoration project was supposed to be my fresh start. After losing Sarah in the accident, I needed to lose myself in work, and what better place than a remote Victorian estate in need of historical documentation? I never imagined that by attempting to preserve this house, I would become part of its preserved collection. My name is Eleanor Wright, and I'm writing this account from what I believe to be the Manor's East Wing study, though I've lost all certainty about directions in this place. The grandfather clock behind me has been striking midnight for the past 6 hours. The walls pulse with a rhythm that matches my heartbeat, and I can hear Margaret Gray's footsteps above me, though I watched her die 3 days ago. Or perhaps it was 3 months from now. I should start from the beginning, while I can still remember what that means. The first time I saw Greystone Manor, it was through a curtain of December snow. The Victorian mansion rose from the white landscape like a charcoal sketch against paper, all sharp angles and elaborate trim work that seemed to catch and hold the shadows. William, the caretaker, met me at the wrought iron gates. His family had worked for the Grays for generations, he explained, though something in his eyes suggested this was more curse than blessing. "Miss Gray is expecting you," he said, shoulders hunched against the wind. "Though she's particular about visitors. Best mind the house's moods." I laughed then. Houses don't have moods, I thought. I was wrong. Margaret Gray was the last living heir, a thin woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to reflect too much light. She showed me to my rooms personally, her heels clicking a strange rhythm on the hardwood floors. I could have sworn the sound continued even after she left. The first anomaly appeared during my initial documentation. A bay window I photographed on the ground floor showed up on my camera roll as a solid wall. When I returned to check, the window was there, but now the pattern of the wallpaper had changed. I blamed poor lighting, camera malfunction, my own fatigue. We humans are so good at explaining away the impossible. But then the rooms began to move. I'd wake to find my bedroom had shifted to a different floor overnight. The library, which I swear had been adjacent to the parlor, would suddenly share a wall with the kitchen. At first, I thought I was losing my mind, but William's knowing looks told me otherwise. "The house breathes," he said one morning, when I confronted him about a doorway that had simply vanished. Best not to fight it. The photographs were worse. Each time I developed a new batch, they showed events I hadn't captured. Margaret Gray in a wedding dress, though she'd never married. A young girl in Victorian clothing staring directly into the lens, though I'd never seen her. Most disturbing were the ones that showed me, in places I hadn't been yet, doing things I hadn't done. It was in the library, or what was the library that day, that I found the Gray family records. The pattern was impossible to ignore once I saw it. Every third generation, the family line would nearly die out, leaving just one heir. That heir would restore the house, and then the records ended there, every time. Margaret found me that night, surrounded by family photographs and architectural drawings. Her smile was too wide, too knowing. "You figured it out, haven't you, cousin?" The word hit me like ice water. Cousin. But that was impossible. I was Eleanor Wright. I had no connection to this place, to these people, except for the gap in my family tree, the grandmother I'd never known, the stories my mother wouldn't tell. "The house needs new blood," Margaret continued. "It's been waiting for you, for us. The restoration isn't about preserving the past, Eleanor. It's about feeding the future." That's when I noticed the walls. They weren't covered in wallpaper at all. The patterns I'd been documenting, the strange organic shapes I'd attributed to Victorian excess, they were veins. The house was alive, and it was hungry. I ran, of course, but in a house that rearranges itself, there is nowhere to run to. Each door led me back to Margaret, to William. to that mysterious girl from the photographs who I now recognized as myself, trapped in an endless loop of time. The house showed me then, through windows that looked into other decades, through doors that opened onto other centuries. It showed me what it truly was, a living thing, grown from the bones and blood of the Gray family, sustained by their sacrifices. Each restoration was a resurrection, each heir a new heart to keep its ancient walls beating. Margaret is dead now, or will be, or has always been. I found her in the conservatory, her body slowly sinking into the floorboards, feeding the house one last time. The walls grow warmer every day, and I can feel them watching me, waiting. William brings me paper to write this account, though his visits come at impossible intervals. Sometimes he appears as an old man, sometimes as a child. Time means nothing here. I understand now why the house chose me. I am the last Gray heir, whether I knew it or not, and soon I will become part of its architecture, another layer in its endless renovation. The girl in the photographs will continue to appear, warning future generations of what's to come, though they'll never listen. They never do. The grandfather clock has finally stopped striking midnight. The walls pulse stronger now, and I can feel them reaching for me. There's one last thing I need to write, one last warning to whoever finds this. If you're reading these words, you're already part of the house. You always have been, and it's time to come home. Some stories creep under your skin, and the next one digs in deeper. I never planned to stay in Millbrook for long. As an anthropologist who studies old farming traditions, I thought I'd just write my paper and leave before winter came. But everything changed when I discovered what really makes things grow in this strange little town. My name is Grace Mitchell, and 3 months ago, I drove into Millbrook to study their farming secrets. I'd heard rumors about how their crops kept growing during the worst drought anyone could remember. While other farms were dying, their corn and wheat fields stayed impossibly green. As someone who studied old farming practices, I had to know why. I expected the townspeople to be unfriendly to outsiders. That's usually how it goes in small farming communities. But Elder Sarah, the old woman who seemed to run everything in Millbrook, welcomed me like she'd been waiting for me her whole life. "We don't get many visitors who understand the old ways," she said on my first day, pouring me tea in her kitchen. Her silver hair caught the sunlight, making it look like she wore a crown. Bunches of dried plants hung from her ceiling in strange patterns that made me feel uneasy, though I couldn't explain why. Our traditions go back to times when people knew that the earth needs something in return for what it gives us, she said, smiling at me with deep wrinkles around her eyes. "You'll learn all about it at our harvest festival." That's when she first mentioned Mary, though I wish I'd paid more attention to the way her voice changed when she said the girl's name. Mary was 12 years old, with hair as pale as wheat and eyes as dark as fresh-turned soil. The other kids stayed away from her like she was different somehow. I'd often see her playing alone in the cornfields, singing songs in a language I didn't recognize. I spent my days talking to farmers about their methods, but none of their answers made sense. They'd talk in circles, saying things like, "The earth provides," and "the harvest requires balance," but never explaining what they meant. I should have noticed sooner that something was terribly wrong in Millbrook, but by the time I understood what was really happening, it was already too late. The first strange thing I noticed was during the new moon. I couldn't sleep that night, so I sat by my window. That's when I heard singing coming from the cornfields. Not normal singing. This was old and wrong somehow, like words that shouldn't be spoken anymore. When I tried to find where it was coming from, I got lost in the corn rows for hours, even though I'd walked those fields every day for weeks. Then there were the kids' games. At first, they looked like normal children playing, but something was off. They'd play this game called Blessing, where one child would lie down in the dirt while others sprinkled soil over them. They'd sing the same strange songs I'd heard at night. When I asked them about it, they'd just run away laughing. But it was John Turner who really scared me first. I found him early one morning, standing at the edge of his cornfield. His hands were dirty, but not with normal mud. The stains were darker, and they smelled like iron. "The soil," he whispered when he saw me. "It has to be fed, Miss Mitchell. It's so hungry these days." His eyes were wide and scared, like he'd seen something he couldn't unsee. Before I could ask what he meant, he hurried away. I started looking closer at everything after that. The corn grew in weird patterns, like giant spirals you could only see from certain angles. The wheat would bend in ways that didn't match the wind. And the soil itself. Sometimes I swear I could feel it vibrate under my feet, like something big was moving deep below. Mary spent more and more time in the fields as harvest season got closer. I'd see her walking between the corn rows, singing those old songs. The other kids wouldn't go near her anymore. "She's been chosen for the blessing," they'd whisper, then run away if I asked what that meant. One day, I found some old photos in the town hall. They were from past harvest festivals, going back 50 years. What I saw made my blood run cold. In every single picture, there was Elder Sarah looking exactly the same, not aging a day, and next to her in each photo was a different girl with wheat-colored hair and dark eyes. Each one was labeled Mary. I knew I should leave right then, pack my car, and drive away as fast as I could. But I couldn't stop thinking about our Mary, about what might happen to her at the harvest festival. I had to know the truth. I just never expected the truth to be so horrible. I decided to follow Mary one night. The moon was dark, and the air felt heavy, like right before a storm. She walked into the cornfield like she was in a trance, singing that strange old song. The corn seemed to bend away from her, making a path I couldn't see before. That's when I found the door. It was an old storm cellar, hidden between the corn rows, the kind farmers used to store food underground. But this was different. The metal was covered in those same spiral patterns I'd seen in the fields, and the handles were shaped like hands reaching up from the earth. My flashlight showed stairs going down, down, down into the dark. The walls weren't dirt like a normal cellar. They were stone, carved with pictures that made my stomach turn. They showed people being given to the earth, and crops growing from what was left. Each carving was labeled with dates and names. So many Marys, going back hundreds of years. At the bottom, I found a big round room. Dried corn and wheat hung from the ceiling, in those same strange patterns I'd seen in Elder Sarah's kitchen. But it was the altar in the middle that made me want to run. It was stained dark brown, and the floor around it. The floor was moving. Not like an earthquake, like breathing. That's when I understood what John Turner meant about feeding the soil. Why the crops grew so well even in the worst drought. Why there was a new Mary every harvest season. I heard footsteps on the stairs behind me. Elder Sarah's voice floated down, calm as ever. "Now you see, Grace, the old ways, the fair exchange." I turned around, but my flashlight showed more than just Elder Sarah. The other farmers were there too, including John Turner. They all held farming tools, scythes, pitchforks, sharp things meant for harvest. "The earth is hungry," Elder Sarah said. "But you already knew that, didn't you? You felt it calling you here just like we knew you would, just like I was called so many harvests ago." That's when I noticed her face was changing in my flashlight beam. The wrinkles were smoothing out. Her silver hair was turning dark. She was getting younger while I watched. And behind me, the breathing of the earth got louder. I tried to run, but where can you run when the very ground beneath you is part of their plan? I made it halfway up the stairs before roots burst through the stone walls, wrapping around my legs like fingers. "You have to choose, Grace," Elder Sarah said, walking closer. She looked younger with each step. "The earth needs its blessing. Either Mary takes her place in the soil, or you do. That's the fair exchange." I saw Mary then, standing at the top of the stairs. She wasn't scared. She was singing that old song, and now I finally understood the words. They weren't just asking for good crops. They were offering a trade, one life to feed thousands. The drought's getting worse every year, Elder Sarah explained. Her face was smooth now, young like mine. Without the blessing, not just Millbrook but every farm for miles would die. How many children would starve then? I wanted to argue, to say this was wrong, but I could feel the truth in the shifting earth under my feet. The ground wasn't just alive, it was ancient, hungry, patient. It had been here long before us, and would remain long after. I took Sarah's place 50 harvests ago, she said. Now it's time for me to return to the soil, and for you to take my role. Unless you'd rather Mary continue the tradition? I looked at Mary's calm face, then at the dark stains on the altar. I thought about all the Marys that came before, about the hungry families in nearby towns, about the dying farms everywhere except Millbrook. The choice I made that night haunts me, but I make the same choice every harvest since. I sit in my kitchen now, the same kitchen where I first met Elder Sarah. The herbs hang from my ceiling in their ancient patterns. My hair has gone silver, though it was dark just last harvest. Funny how time moves differently here in Millbrook. A new Mary plays in the fields outside my window. Her wheat-colored hair shines in the sunlight, and her dark eyes understand too much. The other children avoid her, just like they always do. Just like they should. The drought has gotten worse everywhere else. I hear about farms failing, families leaving, towns dying, but not Millbrook. Never Millbrook. Our crops grow tall and green, fed by what lies deep in our soil, by those who came before. Yesterday, I got a letter from a young anthropologist. She's interested in studying our farming traditions, amazed by how well we do while others fail. She'll arrive next week, full of questions about our old ways. I'll welcome her with tea, like Sarah welcomed me. I'll watch understanding grow in her eyes, like Sarah watched me. And when harvest time comes, well, the earth must be fed. That's the price of survival. That's the fair exchange. I've learned to ignore the sounds from the field at night, the singing in that old language I now know too well. I've learned not to look too closely at the dark stains that never quite wash out. But sometimes, in my dreams, I still hear Mary singing. Not this Mary, all the Marys. Their voices rise from deep in the earth, calling for the next blessing, the next sacrifice, the next keeper of the old ways. And I know that when my time comes, when my voice joins theirs in the soil, another Grace will sit in this kitchen, silver-haired and patient, waiting for the next harvest. After all, the crops must grow. The earth must be fed, and Millbrook's traditions will continue, as they have for hundreds of years, as they will for hundreds more. The real terror is just getting started. Listen closely to the next tale. This is the last time I spend the night in my truck at a gas station parking lot. When you're camping, you sometimes have chance encounters. That's part of the fun of camping. I'll never forget the night I met. I don't even know what I met. Maybe you can tell me. I was on my way to visit my parents as I do every year. 16 hours one way, same on the way back. To be on the safe side, I never made the trip in one go, usually stopping overnight at a freeway service area and sleeping in my truck to save on hotel bills. This year, the trip had started in the same way as usual, comfortably seated with a cushion under my buttocks for comfort, snacks on the passenger seat, and a list of podcast episodes on my phone connected to my car. In short, a total blast. Around 7 p.m., I pulled into the parking lot of a small gas station in a secluded spot so I could spend the night peacefully. I was sitting comfortably in the back seat, windows covered for privacy, finishing the instant noodles I'd bought at the gas station store while watching YouTube videos on my phone. The gas station had a few street lamps scattered here and there was one not far from me whose warm light filtered through the gaps in the window covering. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. I woke up in the night. I looked up to see what had woken me up, but there was no sound outside, not even the wind. I sat up more comfortably and closed my eyes again, and that's when I heard it. Knock, knock. Someone was knocking on the rear window right next to my head. I jerked my head up, thinking I must have been hallucinating. And a few seconds later, the person knocked twice on the window again. What the hell was that? I wondered who could come knocking on the window of a car parked in a gas station parking lot so late. He? Hello? I finally asked. No answer at first. Then a woman's voice. Do you have a light? What? Do I have a light? I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Again the woman replied. Do you have a light? There was something strange in her voice. She sounded flat, as if she were repeating a memorized text in a foreign language. I straightened up, looking out the window. I could see the woman's motionless silhouette thanks to the lamppost that stood at a distance behind her. No, I finally replied. No, sorry. Silence again. Do you have a light? Was this a joke? Look, I don't have a light. I've already told you. Leave me alone. I'd like to be able to sleep in peace, okay? Ask someone else. She didn't move from where she was despite my refusal to lend her a light. What was wrong with her? Can you lend me your phone? She continued in the same emotional voice. I don't know what she wanted from me, but I could sense that something was wrong with her. What for? I asked, to see if her story would hold up. For phone. She just kept repeating phone over and over, in a slow, shrinking voice, as if the word was coming from deep in her throat. It gave me goosebumps. Stop it, all right. I'm not giving you my phone now. Get out before I call the cops. In truth, I'd already reached for my phone, only to realize that I'd drained the battery by falling asleep and leaving it on. I was alone, with no way of calling anyone for help. Then she started to bash her head against my window, while continuing to repeat, phone. Stop it! Hey, stop it! I screamed in panic. I turned back to the front seat to retrieve the flashlight I'd always kept in the glove compartment, returned to my seat and turned it on in the direction of the window. Nothing. She was gone. What the fuck, did she just disappear? Without getting out of the car, I started to get closer to each window and point the flashlight everywhere, just looking for a silhouette, including the ground, to see if she was hiding somewhere, waiting for me to get out. I don't know what had happened. At first I thought maybe it was a bait to lure me out of the car and rob me. But now I didn't know what to think. It was just the strangest thing that had ever happened to me, and my heart was still racing from the adrenaline. There seemed to be nothing around the car, at least as far as I could see from inside. The night was calm again, but I still didn't dare go out. I caught my breath and managed to calm down after a while. When I tell my parents about this, they won't believe it, I muttered. As I couldn't hear anything, I decided to try to sleep for a few more hours. Even though I didn't have the time on my phone, I could see through the gaps in the windows that it was still pitch dark outside. I lay down again and tried to sleep, but to no avail. The stress and tension were still coursing through my body too intensely for that. At some point during the night, I sat up after hearing a pop and realized that the bulb in the nearest streetlight had gone out. After about 1 hour, I think, as my mind wandered between wakefulness and sleep, I was again disturbed by the same sound at the window, which now had the effect of raising the hairs on the back of my neck. She was back, I thought to myself. Sir, I'm Officer Wake. I've been informed of a disturbance in the parking lot. Is everything all right? It was the voice of a young man, obviously a policeman. I began, not really knowing what to say. Yes, well, no, everything's fine. Just a lost woman who came to ask me for a light in the middle of the night. But she's gone now. Everything's fine. Are you sure, sir? Yes, I'm sure. I don't know who called you. Maybe someone alerted by the noise and my screams, I said with a laugh, the pressure easing. Please step. Or of the vehicle, sir. I just want to be sure that everything is all right, he asked in an authoritative voice. No, really. I assure you everything's fine, I said. Get out of the vehicle. Wow, what the fuck was his problem? Out, he said in a loud voice. The hairs on the back of my neck were starting to stand up. Something was wrong. "Where's your car?" I asked. No answer. "Who called you?" Still no answer. I moved slowly away from the pitch-black window. With trembling hands, I grabbed the flashlight I'd kept with me and turned it towards the window. And there in front of me was the silhouette of the woman, the same one who'd harassed me a few hours earlier. "Leave me alone," I screamed. "Out?" Like the last time, she began to repeat the same word over and over in a slow, shrinking voice. Her voice was now somewhere between that of the police officer she'd imitated, I don't know how, and her original voice. All at once she disappeared, and I heard her weight fall on my front hood. This woman, this thing, was now attacking my car. If she couldn't get me out, she was going to force her way in. I stopped thinking and lunged for the front seat. I grabbed the keys and started the engine. I still couldn't see anything in front of me because of the window cover on the windscreen. So, despite the fact that I didn't know what I was going to discover in front of me, I removed it. She was standing on her hands and knees on the hood, both hands on the windscreen, her forehead pressed against the glass. She had two pure white eyes, long, dirty black hair that reached down to her feet, and a single white dress that reached down to her ankles for all clothing. Her wide, inhuman smile began to spread across her face. I pressed the gas pedal. The car sped off. She was still standing on the hood, but as I zigzagged, I finally managed to knock her onto her side. I continued straight towards the parking lot exit to get back on the freeway. Behind me, I could see her silhouette running towards my car, and even over the noise of the engine, I could hear her gaunt cries. I drove for about 2 hours on the freeway. I kept thinking about what had just happened and wondering who she was and what she wanted from me. I didn't have any answers, but one thing was certain. I'd had a narrow escape. Eventually, the adrenaline left my body, and an intense fatigue overcame me to the point of forcing me to stop. I'd just survived a supernatural encounter. This was no time to die from a car accident. I pulled into a gas station parking lot. I leaned my head against the window, just to rest my eyes at first, but 5 minutes later, I was fast asleep. I woke up at the same time as the sun. I yawned and stretched, glad to be alive after that crazy night, and definitely not able to wait to tell my family and friends. But as I walked around the car to stretch my legs after spending the night inside, I noticed something. Something that still haunts and terrorizes me every night. My truck had accumulated a certain amount of road dust, so it was easy to leave marks just by running a finger over it. And there, right in front of my eyes, I could see that there were fingerprints all over the windows and doors, as if someone had been desperately trying to get inside while I was asleep. At first I thought it was from the night I'd spent in the other parking lot. But then I saw them. Dozens of bloody bare footprints all around my truck. If you thought that was bone-chilling, just wait. The next story will leave you breathless. Our RV broke down in a blizzard. The cold was killing us, but they made it worse. This laptop feels like it's made of lead, and my hands are still figuring themselves out. Whether or not that's from the cold still remains to be seen. Regardless, I have to write this down before the memories blur, before I start doubting myself. We never should have taken that trip. It started with Lucas's big announcement. He'd barged into my apartment, holding up a set of keys like he'd just won the lottery. "Guess what?" he said, grinning ear to ear. "I swear, if this is about another one of your lame late-night escapades," Emily called from the kitchen, not even bothering looking towards him. "Relax," Lucas said, plopping down on the couch next to Anya. "This isn't stupid, it's genius. I got us an RV." Anya raised an eyebrow, her laptop screen reflecting the skeptical twist of her lips. "You got an RV? Like you own it now?" Lucas shook his head. No, I borrowed it. My cousin owed me a favor. Thing runs great." "Define great," I said, finally acknowledging him. "Engine purrs like a kitten," Lucas said. "Heater works, stove's good, beds are functional, and best of all, it's free. No hotels, no tents, just us, the open road, and..." The smell of tetanus, Emily interrupted, walking over with her mug. It does not smell like tetanus. Lucas shot back, mock offended. Does it have tires? Anya asked, not bothering to hide her smirk anymore. Lucas ignored her. I'm serious, guys, this is perfect. We've been talking about a trip forever, right? Well, here it is. Northern Wisconsin, beautiful snow-covered campground. A proper camping trip. Camping trip? I asked, setting my pen down. You're aware it's December, right? In Wisconsin? With a major cold front coming in? People die doing this kind of stuff. Lucas waved me off. Oh, come on. It's not like we're climbing Everest. We'll park the RV, take some pictures, roast marshmallows. You'll thank me when you're Instagram famous. Mark doesn't even have Instagram, Anya said. Exactly my point, Lucas replied. Emily sipped her coffee, eyeing him over the rim of her mug. What happens if this great RV breaks down in the middle of nowhere? Lucas leaned back, crossing his arms. Then I fix it. Easy. Oh yeah, Anya said, closing her laptop. Because you're such an expert mechanic. I know enough, Lucas said defensively. Emily looked at me. What do you think, Mark? I hesitated. A part of me wanted to say no, but the way Lucas looked at me hopeful, almost pleading made it hard. Plus, I couldn't deny the idea of getting away for a while sounded nice. I sighed. Fine. But if this RV dies, you're walking back to town, not me. Lucas grinned. Deal. The trip started out fine. Better than fine, actually. The road stretched out ahead of us, snow falling gently, dusting the trees and the narrow two-lane highway. The RV rattled every now and then, but Lucas seemed confident behind the wheel. Anya's dog Max sprawled out on the middle of the floor, snoring softly as Anya snapped photos from the passenger seat. Emily was in the back, organizing our supplies. Who packed this much junk food? She hollered out. It's called being prepared, I shouted back. Lucas glanced at me in the rearview mirror. Junk food? What happened to your health is wealth mantra? It's emergency junk food, I shot back. Anya laughed. You're the kind of guy who brings Monopoly to a frat party, aren't you? He is. Fun fact, Monopoly ruins friendships, Lucas said, tapping on the steering wheel for emphasis. Only if you play wrong, I said. The teasing went on for a while, the kind of banter that comes out naturally when you're with people you care about. But a few hours into the trip, the first signs of trouble presented itself. It came from a sound, a low sputtering beneath the hum of the engine. Chug, 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 thunk. What was that? Emily asked, poking her head into the cabin. Lucas frowned, tapping the dashboard. Probably just the cold. Let me. Clunk. The RV shuddered and lurched to a stop. Lucas swore under his breath and turned the key again. Click, click, click. Nothing. Lucas, Anya said slowly, please tell me you can fix this. He sighed, already pulling on his jacket. It's probably something minor. I'll check. He stepped outside, the door slamming shut behind him with a loud thud. A wisp of cold air from the outside dropped the temperature almost immediately. Anya zipped up her coat while Emily started digging out blankets. Great, I muttered. Now what? A glance out of the window only showed a slowly dissolving road with an endless mask of trees on either side. I guess we'll wait, Emily said. Lucas'll figure it out. Max whined, his ears perked. The wind outside the RV continued to pick up, howling through the trees and whistling against the metal cabin. Lucas came back inside after a crisp 10 minutes, his boots dragging snow onto the linoleum floor. His face was flushed from the cold, but there was an uncharacteristic tightness in his jaw. Well? Emily asked, her voice edged with tension. It's the fuel line, Lucas said, shaking snow off his jacket. It's frozen solid. I don't have the tools to fix it out here. Anya rubbed her hands together, blowing on them for warmth. So, what does that mean? We're stuck? For now, Lucas admitted, glancing at me. I'll call for help in the morning once there's better light. Wait. Why not call now? I asked. Lucas held up his phone, the screen showing a single mocking bar of service. Welcome to the middle of nowhere. I'll have to hoof it until I get reception. Emily groaned and slumped into the corner seat. Great. This is how every horror movie starts. Relax, Lucas said, forcing a grin. It's not that bad. We've got food, blankets, and each other. Worst case scenario, we'll hike to a ranger station tomorrow. Because hiking through a snowstorm is so much better, Emily muttered, pulling her coat tighter around herself. It's not storming yet, Anya said, peering out the window. It's just snowing lightly. Honestly, it's kind of pretty. The rest of us followed her gaze. She wasn't wrong. The snow drifted down in soft, delicate flakes, coating the surrounding trees in white. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, empty and peaceful. For a moment, it was almost comforting. Then Max started growling. The sound was low and guttural, his ears pinned back as he stared at the door. "Hey," I said softly, reaching to scratch behind his ears. "What's up, boy?" He didn't respond, just kept growling, his body tense like he was ready to lunge. Maybe he heard an animal? Anya suggested. Emily frowned. An animal? Out here in the middle of winter? What would be dumb enough to wander around in this cold? Lucas stood and walked to the door, cracking it open just enough to stick his head outside. The sudden rush of cold made the rest of us shiver. "Do you see anything?" I asked. "Nope," he said, shutting the door quickly. "Just snow and trees." Max didn't stop growling. A couple of hours later, we started settling in for the night. Lucas and Emily rigged up a system of blankets and jackets to keep us warm, while Anya tried to coax Max into relaxing. "I don't get it," she said, scratching his back. "He's usually so calm on trips. Maybe he's just picking up on our nerves," I said. "Why is it so cold in here?" Emily said, settling into a corner with her arms crossed. The weather didn't mention anything about it dropping below freezing. Lucas chuckled dryly. "Hey, it's not like we're totally helpless. We've got camping supplies. If it keeps getting colder, we can light a fire outside." "And risk freezing to death faster?" Emily shot back. "What do you want me to say?" "It's better than sitting in here and complaining." "Can you two not?" I said, cutting in before things got heated. "Let's just focus on staying warm and figure the rest out in the morning." The tension broke slightly, but there was still an edge in the air. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind billow against the RV. I took in a deep breath. I needed to get outside for a moment to unwind before trying to sleep. When I opened up the rear doors, I saw them. Footprints. The snow outside was untouched, except for a line of small, bare, childlike prints leading from the trees to the RV's front door. Guys?" I said, my voice soft. Anya looked up first, her eyes squinting as she followed my gaze. "What are those?" Lucas walked over and glanced down. "Footprints? They're small," I said. Emily joined us, choosing to peer out of the frosted window. "A kid? Out here? That doesn't make any sense." We stared for a moment. The strange, meandering path of prints seemed completely unworried. They had stopped just short of the door. We didn't say anything, but we all noticed that none of the prints were leading away. Max growled again from behind us, low and insistent. His nose pointed towards the open door. Lucas shook his head. "Maybe it's from an animal that just sort of looks like footprints. Snow can mess with shapes." "Yeah," Anya chirped in, unconvincingly. No one wanted to admit what we were really thinking. Deep in the tree line, I thought I heard something. A faint floating sound. A laugh, high and breathy, like a breeze being swept through the trees. "Did you hear that?" Emily whispered, her eyes wide. Lucas nodded slowly. "Yeah." By the time the first light of dawn seeped through the trees, none of us had slept. Not properly, anyway. Emily had dozed off for a few minutes, her head slumped against the wall, but every creak of the RV made her snap to attention. Anya had stayed curled up with Max, one hand clutching his fur, the other pressed to her mouth, searching for those hot little bursts of breath. Lucas sat yawning in the front seat, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. I didn't fare much better. I just stared out the window, watching as the snow piled higher and higher around us. The frost from the outside started to creep across the metal of the RV walls. "All right," Lucas said eventually, clapping his hands together to break the stillness. "Here's the plan. Mark and I head out, try to find the main road or a ranger station. Worst case, we flag someone down." Emily sat up sharply. "Are you serious? It's got to be in the double digits, and not on the positive side. What's the alternative?" Lucas sighed. "We just sit here and wait to freeze to death?" Emily gestured at the iced-over windows. "You think hiking through that is a better idea?" "We have to do something," Lucas snapped, running a hand through his hair. "The RV's dead, the heater's barely hanging on, and we can't just—" "Stop!" Anya's voice cut through the argument. She looked pale, her eyes darting between us. "Can we please not fight right now? We're all scared. Let's think this through." Lucas exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Fine. Ideas?" I hesitated. "What about a fire? We've got wood, matches. If we can melt some of this ice, maybe we can make the heater last longer." "That's not terrible," Lucas admitted. Emily crossed her arms. "It's better than splitting up and blindly wandering out into the storm." "Okay," Lucas said. "Fire it is." The fire should have helped. In theory, it should have been simple. Clear a spot in the snow, stack some wood, and let the flames do the rest. But the moment we stepped outside, the cold wrapped around us like a living thing. The wind needled its way through every layer we wore like they weren't even there. "God," Emily muttered, clutching her coat. "It's even colder than last night." When we hopped off of the back of the RV, our feet slid straight to the ground. The snow underfoot gave away too easily, falling away from our boots without compacting. It was like stepping into powdered ash. We didn't think too much about it, though. Lucas and I were too focused on clearing a patch for the fire. It was easier than it should have been, like moving around fake snow from a TV set. It wasn't long before we had the wood and kindling set up. Lucas brought the flame from the lighter down towards the pit. Pfft! The flame flickered and died before it got anywhere near the kindling. Lucas swore under his breath. He tried again. Same thing. The cold was getting worse. "Here, try this one," Anya said, handing him another lighter. Click. The flame barely lasted a second before a gust of wind swallowed it. "Come on," he muttered, fumbling with the switch. "Maybe we should just go back inside," Anya said, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. I was about to agree when I heard it. The faint, tinny sound of an old music box. Plink, plink, plunk, plink. The melody was distant at first, almost delicate, as though it didn't want to interrupt us. It gently crept into the clearing between the trees, carried on the wind, growing louder with each note. Cheerful and steady, yet unmistakably offbeat like a nursery rhyme, slowed to a crawl. We followed the noise towards an open strip of barren snow that used to be called a road. Then, through the tree line, we watched as a figure slid out into the open. It wasn't sudden. There was no jolt of shock, no moment of panic. It arrived as though it had every right to be there, and for a brief moment, we thought it might be someone who could help us. The figure wore a long, black-tailored coat, with a wide-brimmed hat that was tilted at an almost careless angle. But the face that was hidden beneath it was something that I wish I could forget. It was smooth, pale, and polished. Not a single wrinkle on its head. Its features were just slightly off enough that it felt too close to being human, just close enough to be wrong. The eyes were large and completely black, like carved pieces of polished coal. There was a faint, reflective shine to them that glimmered from the snow. Its nose was delicately thin, sharp and long, and the mouth thin and uncomfortably wide curved upward in a slight performative smile. It stopped in the middle of the road, placing one hand over its chest. Then, with a singular fluid motion, it bent over at the waist into a deep bow, its hat almost brushing against the snow. None of us moved. We froze. We watched as the figure straightened, reaching into its coat with a calm, precise motion. It withdrew something small, something metal that caught the pale light of a music box topped with a dancing ballerina. Its long, gloved fingers shifted over to the crank, turning it slowly, deliberately. The melody twisted and warped with each turn, the sound becoming clearer and sharper, as though it were summoning the air itself to attention. The ballerina began twirling. Emily broke from her trance. She took a half-step backward, her boots crunching softly against the snow. The figure turned its head toward her, the motion unnervingly confident, the glint of its black eyes reflecting her movement. It raised its arms up in a flourish. Then the children appeared. They came one by one, stepping out from the tree line with an odd sort of playfulness, skipping and spinning as they emerged. Their bare feet left no marks in the snow. I counted 6, maybe 7 children. Their silhouettes were half obscured by the swirling snow. Jesus, Lucas breathed. The figure raised one arm, a sharp, controlled gesture that froze the children in place. They stood there, still as statues, before their faces finally turned toward us. Even through the snow, we could tell they were wrong. Their eyes were too small, their mouths too wide. Frost rimed their cheeks and hair, and their expressions never changed from anything other than excitement. The figure tilted its head, as if inviting us to react to their little show. Inside, I whispered. My voice dropped. Emily didn't need to be told twice. She turned around and bolted toward the RV doors, pulling Anya with her. Lucas grabbed my arm, yanking me back as the figure took a single step forward, its footfall utterly silent. We slammed the door shut behind us, fumbling with the lock until our stiffening fingers prevailed. Emily had already begun yanking the blinds closed. Meanwhile, the sound of the music box hadn't stopped. What the hell was that? Emily stuttered out. Lucas didn't answer. He paced near the door, peeking through a crack in the blind. They were kids, Anya said softly, her voice distant. Did everyone else see? They weren't kids, Max growled again from the lowest point in his throat, his hackles raised. The sound of his nails clicking back and forth in front of the door filled the cabin. We waited, quiet, hoping somehow it's too away. But then came the knock. It was a single, deliberate tap at the door. We all turned to face. Another knock followed, calm and measured. Max barked sharply, throwing himself against the door. His claws scratched at the metal, but the sound barely seemed to register over the rising temp. Don't, I whispered as Lucas moved toward the blind. He ignored me, pulling them back just enough to peek outside again. He froze, his face draining of color. He quickly took a step back. What is it? Emily asked, her voice shaking. He's closer, Lucas murmured. I forced myself to look. Through the narrow gap in the blinds, I saw him. The man stood just outside the RV, his face tilted upward like it was admiring a painting. Behind him, the children had gathered. They stood in a loose semicircle, their heads tilted in unison, their wide, frozen eyes staring directly at the RV. It looked like they were about to sing a carol. The man moved. Slowly, he reached out and adjusted the brim of his hat, then withdrew the music box again. His long fingers wound the crank with loving stroke. The melody shifted, the notes warping into a new tune, something higher, lighter. The children swayed gently. One of them giggled. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a blade, sharp and high-pitched. Another joined in, then another, their laughter blending with the music until it was impossible to tell where one sound ended and the other began. What do they want? Emily whispered, her back pressed against the far wall. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The figure tilted its head again, as if he had heard her question. Then, with a gentle motion, he raised a long finger and softly tapped against the frosted window. The sound crisp and Anya whimpered, curling into herself. They're going to come inside. No, Lucas said firmly. They can't get it. The figure tapped the glass again, this time with more force. A spiderweb of frost began to spread outward from where his finger had pressed against the pane. Lucas, I said, my throat hoarse. Step back. He didn't move, his eyes locked on the frost as it crept across the window. The figure's black eyes seemed to regard the frosted glass with amusement. Then the music stopped, cutting off mid-note. The voice replaced, "Won't you come outside?" It wasn't loud, but it felt like it came from everywhere all at once. The voice was sharp, smooth, and layered, as though every word cracked into dozens of smaller voices. Emily flinched, pressing her hands over her ear. Lucas backed away from the door. "We're not going anywhere," he yelled, his voice shaking. The figure dropped its head, almost as if it were in contemplation. Then with a single movement it turned the crank on the music box again, the melody resuming, now faster, harsh. The children began to move, their hands tapping softly against the RV, their eyes never the window. The frost on the glass began to spread inward like creeping vine. "They're coming in," Anya said, her voice flat. "No," Lucas snapped, grabbing a knife from the counter. "They're not getting any." The door rattled violently, the metal groaning under the strain. Max barked again, louder this time, throwing himself against the base of the door as though he could hold it closed. The music swelled, filling every corner of the RV. The encroaching ice raced across the walls, the floor, the ceiling, encasing everything in a thin, brittle layer. The door gave a final shuddering rattle and then it stopped. The music cut off again. We stood frozen, the silence almost unbearable. The frost-covered walls creaked softly, but nothing moved, nothing. "They're gone," Lucas said after a long moment. Anya shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "They're still out." The air inside grew colder with each passing second, crawling into our skin, our lungs, our bones. The frost wasn't just on the walls anymore, it was covering us. A thin layer of ice clung to Lucas's jacket, to Emily's hair, and even to Max's fur. It spread with a controlled sluggishness. I noticed my fingers first. They tingled, then turned numb. I flexed them, trying to shake it off, but the stiffness didn't go away. My gloves felt like they weren't there anymore, as if the cold had seeped straight through the fabric right into the flesh. "We need to move," Lucas muttered, his voice trembling. He tried to walk, but his knees buckled, and he slumped onto the kitchen seat. "Lucas?" Emily's voice cracked. Are you okay?" She took a step towards him. Her lips were cracked and purple. Her cheeks had already lost all their color. Lucas didn't reply, just stared at his hands. His gloves were frozen stiff, the fabric cracking as he tried to flex his fingers. He peeled one off, and I gasped. His fingertips were white, almost translucent, with deep, angry cracks that bled sluggishly. The skin along his knuckles had split open, exposing raw, purple flesh beneath. "I can't feel them," he said, his voice distant. I can't feel any." Emily whimpered, pulling her own hands close to her chest. I tried to speak, but my lips wouldn't move right. My tongue felt thick and uncoordinated, like it was stuck to the roof of my mouth. I reached up, brushing at my face, and froze. My cheek was hard to the touch, the skin taut and unyielding. My breath came in short, shallow bursts, barely fogging the air, and when I exhaled, I saw tiny flecks of ice falling from my mark. Anya's voice was faint, barely audible. She was still sitting by the window, her arms wrapped around Max, who was lying unnaturally still. Her face was pale, her eyes glassy, and her breath came in weak, uneven gasps. She looked down at Max, her hands trembling. His fur was matted with frost, his nose coated in a thin layer of ice. His chest didn't rise. "Max?" Anya whispered, shaking him gently. "Max, come on, wake up." He didn't move. Her trembling turned violent, and she let out a strangled cry, pressing her face into his frozen fur. "No, no, no." The sound snapped something in me. I stumbled toward her, my legs barely cooperating, every step sending sharp jolts of pain up my frozen. I knelt beside her, reaching out, but she flinched away, clutching Max tight. "We're freezing," Emily said suddenly, her voice sharp and slurred. Her teeth chattered violently, her body shaking. We're freezing to death." "No," Lucas muttered, his voice thick. His eyes sluggishly flitted around the RV. "No, we're not. We can't be. We're inside. The heat's on. We're dying," Emily murmured under her broken breath. Her words hung in the air, sharp and jagged. I staggered back to my feet, grabbing the edge of the counter for support. My head was spinning, my vision blurred at the edges, and my heart felt like it was slowing. Then I saw it. The frost on the window had cleared, just enough to reveal a single black eye staring in. My breath caught in my throat. The man's face was pressed against the glass, its lips pulled into that faint, thin smile. It blinked once, slowly, almost lazily. Emily sobbed, fully collapsing onto the floor. Why is it watching us? Why is it just watching? Lucas began to laugh, a low, strained sound that turned into a cough. He wheezed, his breath rattling. Isis, it getting warmer in here? The creature's black eyes shifted slightly, locking onto me. It raised one gloved hand and tapped gently on the glass, the sound soft but punctual. My body convulsed involuntarily, my limbs jerking as I tried to move, to run, to do anything. But I couldn't look away from those eyes, black and endless, swallowing everything they saw. I sank to the floor, my strength draining away. We were freezing, and it was waiting. Anya stirred first. Her movements were slow, almost hesitant, as though she were waking from a dream. She didn't say anything, she just stood up, staring down at Max's frozen body with a strange, distant look on her face. "Anya," I whispered, "what are you doing?" She didn't respond. Her trembling hands slid under Max's stiff body, and with a strength I didn't think she had left, she lifted him into her arms. The frost cracked and splintered as his limbs shifted. "Anya, stop," Emily rasped, her voice faint and broken. "Where are you going?" But Anya didn't listen. She stood unsteadily, her legs shaking beneath her, and turned toward the door. "Anya, no." Lucas reached out, but his body was weak. The effort made him cough violently. She didn't look back. Her pale, frost-bitten hands fumbled with the lock, the metal screeching softly as it turned. The door creaked open, and the cold rushed in. "Anya, please." I tried to stand again, but my legs gave out beneath me, sending me sprawling onto the frozen floor. "Don't go out there." She hesitated in the doorway, the wind catching her hair and tossing it around her face like brittle threads. For a moment, she looked back at us. Her eyes were strange, glassy, almost peaceful. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'll be warm soon." Then she stepped outside, the door swinging shut behind her with a hollow clang. With all my strength, I pulled myself up to a window. Through the frost-covered glass, I watched as Anya carried Max into the clearing. Her movements were slow and mechanical, her head bowed against the wind. The snow swirled around her, fluttering in strange, erratic patterns. The creature watched her approach, its black eyes glinting with faint amusement. The children walked towards her, swaying with every step, their smiles widening. Anya sank to her knees in the snow, cradling Max's body. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts, fogging the air around her face. I watched as frost crept up her arms, her legs, her cheeks, but she didn't move. The creature stepped forward, its coat billowing slightly in the wind. It crouched low, its movements precise and deliberate, and extended a hand toward Anya. Her breathing slowed, her head tilted upward, her glassy eyes locking onto the creature's face. I don't know if she took its hand or if it just hovered there, but she smiled just for a moment before her body slumped forward. Her arms went limp, and Max's frozen body fell into the snow beside her. I slumped down against the RV walls and closed my eyes. When I managed to open them again, I noticed how far the ice had advanced. It had crawled up the walls, pooled in the corners, and spread like veins across the floor. Emily was curled up on the floor, her head pulled to the side, her lips stained a deep, unnatural blue. Her breaths were faint, so faint they seemed to stop at times before resuming with a shallow wheeze. But Lucas wasn't breathing at all. His body sat rigid in the seat, his head bowed forward, as though in deep contemplation. His face was gaunt, the pale skin stretched tightly over his cheekbones, while his hands were frozen mid-clench like sprawling claws. His eyes were wide and glossy, staring through a layer of frost. Emily's shallow breathing eventually fully slowed. Her chest rose and fell with longer pauses in between, her face slack, her eyelids fluttering before sinking shut. Whatever part of her was still fighting to stay conscious was losing. I couldn't look at her anymore. I could feel the same numbness creeping over me, a heaviness pulling me under. It wasn't sudden. It was maddeningly slow, creeping into my head until the edges of my vision softened. My hands no longer felt like mine. I tried to lift them, to reach for something, anything, but they stayed limp at my sides. The world around me dimmed, retreating into a strange, hazy fog. The shapes in the RV grew indistinct. The door creaked. The sound sliced through the fog, jarring and unnatural. I forced my eyes to focus, but it felt like trying to see through a frozen lens. The door had opened. The man stepped inside. He moved with unhurried care. His boots were soundless against the slick floor. I couldn't turn my head to follow him, but I saw him out of the corner of my eye, tall and angular, the brim of his hat brushing against the low ceiling. His presence filled the room like a heavy weight. He passed by me without a glance, his gaze fixed on Emily. He stopped beside her, leaning down slowly, his face close to hers. Those black, glinting eyes studied her slack expression like they were looking beneath her skin. And then the man turned toward me. He smiled, just slightly, just enough. I tried to move, to scream, to do anything, but I was a spectator trapped in my own body. My breath caught in my throat, frozen along with the rest of me. All I could do was meet its gaze. Then the headlights hit. A sudden, blinding flash of light cut through the RV. My vision burned white, and for a moment, I thought I heard the creature's footsteps falter. When the spots cleared from my eyes, it was gone. The door swung open, the snow swirling violently outside. But there was no trace of the figure, no sign it had ever been there. My mind finally slipped. I woke to the soft beeping of a heart monitor and the rhythmic hiss of an oxygen mask. The hospital room was sterile and bright. I noticed that my body felt heavy and strange, stiff like it wasn't entirely mine. A nurse stood at my bedside, adjusting something on an IV stand. She turned when she noticed my eyes open, her expression softening with relief. "Welcome back," she said quietly, offering a faint smile. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw. Water. She handed me a cup, and I drank. The liquid seared its way down my throat. It hurt, but at least it felt like something. "Where's Emily?" I asked, my voice rasping. Her expression shifted, her smile fading into something more careful. "She's next door," she said softly. "She's stable, but not awake yet." I nodded, closing my eyes briefly. Emily was alive. That was enough. The hours blurred together, my body trapped in a haze of pain and exhaustion. When I finally had the strength to sit up, I asked to see Emily. The doctor hesitated but eventually agreed, guiding me slowly down the hall. My legs felt unsteady beneath me, my steps dragging against the polished floor. When I reached her room, I stopped in the doorway. Emily looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, her pale face almost blending into the stark white of the sheets. Her chest rose and fell faintly, and the machines around her beeped steadily, indifferent to how fragile she looked. I hesitated, then shuffled forward and sat beside her. Her skin had the same off-color pallor as mine, like the frost had left a stain. I watched her breathe, each rise and fall of her chest a small reassurance that she was still here, still alive. After a while, her eyes fluttered open. She squinted against the light, then turned her head to me. Her lips parted in a faint smile. "You're awake," I said, my voice hoarse. The relief that flooded through me was almost enough to push the other feelings away. "Yeah," she murmured, her voice rough and weak. "What happened?" "I don't know," I said, "but we're alive." She nodded slowly, but there was no relief in her expression. Her gaze drifted past me, out of focus, like she was looking through the walls. "For now," she whispered. I didn't know what to say. I turned my attention to the window, watching the snow swirl against the glass. Then the TV sputtered on. The sound cut through the silence with a sudden, violent hiss of static. I flinched, turning toward the corner of the room where the screen glowed faintly. No one had touched the remote. "Did you turn it on?" I asked Emily. My voice sounded far away. She shook her head weakly. The screen flickered again. The static thick and noisy, lines of distortion rippling through the image. For a moment, nothing happened. It was just chaos on the screen, noise clawing at our ears. Then the static shifted, and the picture began to clear. Shapes emerged faint, shadowy figures moving within the gray haze. A slow, warped melody played faintly in the background, growing louder as the picture sharpened. The tune was familiar. A song from a 70s TV special. "If you try to turn around, when you hear his icy sound." "No," Emily whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but I saw the fear in her wide, glassy eyes. The song continued, each word sharper and more distorted, crawling out of the speakers. "He's sure to disappear, but you know, yes, you know." The screen glitched violently, the shapes twisting and contorting. For a moment, I thought I saw something, a figure standing still in the static, its dark form motionless, its wide-brimmed hat unmistakable. "Then you know Jack Frost is here." The screen went black. "Turn it off," Emily rasped. "It's already off," I said. Emily stared at the blank screen, her breath shallow and uneven. Her lips trembled as she spoke. "It's not gone," she said, her voice rattling. "It's never going to leave." I didn't answer. My eyes were still locked on the TV, waiting for the static to return. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought I could hear the faint, tinny sound of a music box. What you've heard so far is nothing compared to the terror in our next tale. My cats are protecting me from something. It started with a letter and a deed. Uncle Elias, my mother's reclusive brother, had passed away under mysterious circumstances, leaving his sprawling house and the surrounding land to me. I hadn't seen him in nearly a decade, but my childhood memories of him were fond. He was eccentric but kind. His stories always a little too fantastical to be true, yet told with such conviction that I believed every word. When I was younger, I idolized him. As I got older, life took over, and we drifted apart. Now, standing in the doorway of his old house, I felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and unease. The house had the kind of presence that loomed over you, tall and weather-worn, with windows that seemed to watch. The surrounding land stretched endlessly, a mixture of untamed forest and rolling fields. It felt both inviting and isolating. Still, it was mine now, and I planned to make it my home. It felt too big and empty for just me, though, so I decided I'd adopt a cat for companionship. The shelter told me I could pick up my new friend in a week, plenty of time to settle in. The first night in the house was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of quiet where every creak of the floorboards sounds like a footstep. I chalked it up to my nerves and the age of the place. By the third night, though, I couldn't ignore the oddities. I'd hear faint whispers, just on the edge of comprehension, coming from empty rooms. Doors I knew I had closed would be slightly ajar. A cold draft seemed to follow me, though the windows were all sealed. Once, I found a light on in the basemental light I was sure I hadn't turned on. One night, I was jolted awake by the sound of something heavy scraping across the attic floor directly above my bed. I lay frozen, heart pounding, staring at the ceiling. Eventually, the noise stopped, but I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The following morning, I ventured up to the attic, but found nothing out of place. The thick layer of dust covering the old furniture and forgotten belongings was undisturbed. Whatever had made the noise left no trace. By the time the week was up, I was desperate for my new companion. When I finally brought home the little black cat I named her Artemis I, felt a glimmer of hope. Her presence immediately made the house feel less oppressive. She was curious and bold, strutting through the rooms like she owned the place. That first night, she slept at the foot of my bed, and I felt safer than I had since I'd moved in. The strange occurrences didn't stop entirely, but they seemed less intense. The whispers were softer, the drafts less chilling. It was as if the house or whatever was in it was wary of Artemis. Intrigued, I started researching cats and the paranormal. I learned that in many cultures, cats are believed to have a spiritual connection, capable of warding off evil spirits and guiding the dead. It was a comforting thought, but it also raised a chilling question. Had something in this house been responsible for my uncle's death? One night I decided to test a theory. I left Artemis in the living room and went upstairs to my bedroom. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the oppressive feeling returned, stronger than ever. The whispers were louder, more insistent, and I swore I could see a shadow moving in the corner of my eye. Panicked, I called for Artemis. She padded into the room, jumped onto the bed, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. The whispers faded, the shadow disappeared. That's when I knew. Whatever was in this house couldn't touch me as long as Artemis was nearby. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. What if there was a moment she wasn't there? What if the spirit grew stronger? The solution seemed simple. More cats. I adopted another, a gray tabby I named Milo, and then another, a calico named Cleo. Each new addition seemed to strengthen the invisible barrier between me and the malevolent presence. Soon, the house was alive with the sound of purring and playful paws. My little army of feline guardians had transformed the oppressive mansion into something almost cozy, but the spirit didn't leave. Every night, as I lay in bed surrounded by my cats, I'd see it. A shadowy figure standing in the doorway, watching. It never moved, never spoke, but its presence was undeniable. I could feel its hatred, its frustration. It wanted me gone, but it couldn't reach me. As the weeks turned to months, the cats became my life. I added more to the family. A Siamese named Oliver, a fluffy Maine Coon I called Willow, a scrappy little stray I found on the property, whom I named Ash. The list goes on. Each one brought a new layer of warmth and protection to the house. The spirit's presence became almost a routine. It was there every night, but it could do nothing but stare. Occasionally, I'd feel a pang of fear. What if I was wrong? What if it was biding its time? On those nights, I'd gather all the cats into my bedroom, their comforting purrs lulling me to sleep. They seemed to know instinctively when I needed them most. I'd wake up to find them all nestled around me, a fortress of fur and trust. One stormy night, the power went out. The house was plunged into darkness, and for the first time in months, I felt truly vulnerable. I lit candles, the flickering light casting long shadows on the walls. The spirit's silhouette seemed larger that night, more defined. But Artemis jumped onto my lap, her green eyes meeting mine with an unspoken assurance. Milo and Cleo flanked her, and soon the others joined. Their presence banished the fear. Even now, as I write this, I can see it. The spirit stands in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the faint glow of the hallway light. It stares, as it always does, but I'm not afraid. Artemis is curled up on my chest, purring softly. Milo is at my feet. Cleo, Willow, Oliver, and Ash are scattered around the room, their serene presence a shield I know will never falter. This house is mine, and as long as I have my cats, it always will be. The shadows grow deeper with each story, and the next one will have you looking over your shoulder. There's a strange phenomenon in the town where my mother was raised. From what I'm told, it happens most often on moonless nights, when the cool wind combs the blades of grass with a mother's touch. Every time it happens, the townsfolk gather at the edges of the field, holding their breath, eyes focusing ahead, muscles tensing in the subtle throes of anticipation, the tightening of lips, the clenching of jaws, the flexing of fingers. Those who are there when it starts say you can feel the shift, like a frog thrashing about in their stomachs. Then, slowly, It begins to happen. First, loose blades of grass rise gently from the field and hang, suspended, lingering, scattered through the night sky like green, earthy stars. Next come the fireflies in droves, swarms, spilling out from the darkness of the trees, as if they had a duty to light the field for the onlookers. Next come the creatures. Great deer with massive antlers step unflinchingly out from the wood. Slowly, they lift. They bound through the night sky with effortless poise, illuminated in silhouette by the fireflies and perfectly star-studded sky. Birds enter the field cardinals. Blue jays, red-breasted robin sand take flight without so much as a ruffling of feathers. Squirrels swim effortlessly through the black. On some nights, a wolf pads casually among the prey he normally consumes. The prey shows no fear, and the wolf no hunger. The field drew the attention of the townsfolk the same way a black hole absorbs everything in its radius. The locals swear that the air seems filled with music when it happens a haunting melody that seems to sound slightly different to everyone. The tailor says it sounds like the snare of a drum. The innkeeper swears it's a lute. The minister is certain that it is the drone of a church organ and heralds it as a miracle from God. The truth is, nobody knows how to explain the field. The religious claim it surely must be God. The atheists are convinced it is some sort of gravitational distortion, a wobble in the physics of the universe that we don't quite understand yet. The spiritual call it magic. Some simply think it is the earth, or Mother Nature, delighting in her creation. The one thing everybody agreed on, however, was the rules. Most everybody in the town agree upon these rules, and are eager to tell any out-of-town stranger that asks. Rule 1. The field keeps its own secret. Anybody trying to document the phenomena, whether it be photograph or even writing, will find themselves with blank paper and empty film. Rule 2. The field protects. Do not attempt to harm any creature within the field. Rule 3. No human can enter the field. As a direct result of rule number 1, most everybody outside the village who heard of the field thought all the townsfolk were touched in the head. Many were of the opinion that this was some sort of mass hysteria or hallucination. The more suspicious even thought witchcraft, some form of trickery. But each and every long-standing member of the village swears the truth, as did their grandparents and even great-grandparents. Each tells the same story, reciting the same rules. In my belief, there are only two options. It is an extended, multi-generational hoaxer. Just maybe, hopefully, they're all telling the truth. Rule 2 was discovered long ago by the great-grandfather of the blacksmith, who got the idea to try and use the floating deer as target practice. As the story goes, he took careful aim with his musket, and when he pulled the trigger, the bullet shot forth until it reached the very edge of the field. It stopped dead in its path. For a brief moment, it merely hovered, before shooting back the opposite way and passing clean through the man's skull, killing him instantaneously. The field protects. Do not try to harm the creatures of the field. Rule 3 is the most ambiguous of the 3 rules. Nobody who has entered the field has ever been visibly harmed. However, nobody who has entered the field has ever returned. The townsfolk describe the barrier of the field as a one-way door. They do not mourn those who go into the field, nor do they celebrate them. Any human that steps into the field will lift from the earth, same as all the other creatures. The difference is that the humans will never touch the ground again. While all the creatures of the field seem to have an innate sense of how to maneuver within it, humans seem to lack that instinct. They simply rise up into the black, until they are one with the stars. Very few of the people have witnessed this phenomenon, but those who have described the people who enter the field as those with nothing to lose. The mother who had lost her child, the carpenter whose arm had been shredded by a saw blade, the husband mourning the premature death of his wife. They enter the field with the knowledge that they will never return, and once they enter, onlookers describe them as radiating a sense of wonder. They do not seem afraid as they lift from the grassy carpet. Their eyes reflect a kaleidoscope of color. The stress and sorrow in their faces melt away into a sense of awe, enchantment. Some swear that they can see their lips moving, as if those inside the field are talking or singing, but no noise escapes from the field except the aching sense of music that appears differently to everyone. My mother is gone now. I have nothing to lose anymore. She told me tales of the field when I was very young. I remember her sitting on her lap as she played piano, sometimes placing my tiny hands over hers and feeling her fingers, far more nimble than mine, depressing the keys to form melodies that tickled my ears with awe. I would ask her questions, as any child would, about what she was like as a child, what her mother was like, the grandmother I had never met. With her calm green eyes and a patient smile, she would speak of the field. She would speak of what the music sounded like to her, the gentle melody of a grand piano end, how she would hold her mother's hand as she watched the creatures fly in their beautiful, haunting dance through the darkness of the night sky. It was her opinion that the field was magic that we would never understand, a sort of beauty that we were lucky to watch, but could never truly be a part of. The field was nature. The field was mystery. The field was proof that no matter how far humans traveled, no matter the greatness of our technology and machines, there were parts of the earth we could simply never comprehend. I have known pain, love, grief, joy, anger, bewilderment. I have explored the world and answered many of the questions I had as a small child. There is one question that remains. What is inside the field? I feel that my whole life has led to this moment, to this night. Tonight will be a new moon. The sky grows dark. A gentle breeze is blowing from the north. It rained yesterday, and the air still smells like fresh earth and mist. As the sun fades from the sky, we all begin to hear it. The music has started. For me, it sounds like a distant piano, playing a hauntingly familiar melody that I cannot quite place. I see the swarms of fireflies lighting up the field. The deer have begun to bound. The tales were all true. It seems like some sort of ethereal dance. The faint music swells and a crescendo of fireflies and birds swarm in an arc of light and color through the night sky. The townsfolk gather in a crowd some length away from the field, but nobody seems to notice when I move forward. The field has an electric energy, a weight that calls to me, like a black hole sucking me in. My final question will soon be answered. I hesitantly reach a hand out to the field's edge, and as soon as my fingers touch the border, I feel the density of the field sucking me forward. My mind was made up for me as soon as I brushed the surface of the field. The music swells in my ears, loud and clear, but it is not just a piano anymore. It is also banjo, organ, flute, drums, filling my head and spirit with an indescribable energy. My feet leave the ground, and I begin to rise. The creatures are not simple forest animals any longer. The deer's eyes multiply, and their head splits in a vertical mouth, lined with razor teeth. Its tail elongates. Covered in carapace-like protrusions, almost like a centipede, has grown from where its stub used to be curling and waving behind it with an eerie weightlessness. The fireflies are now large glowing balls of indiscriminate light, in various colors: red, blue, green, yellow, purpley kaleidoscope of brilliant light illuminating the sky. The birds have sprouted multiple sets of wings, and they vibrate and thrum like those of a bee. They seem much bigger now, and their talons glint like the edge of a newly forged knife. There is a wolf tonight. It is the size of a great lion, with a silvery mane that looks wiry and almost sharp, like touching it will cut flesh. The pupils of its eyes are non-existent. What used to be eyes are gaping black holes. The wolf's head is turned in my direction. "Welcome," it says. A cicada-like buzzing fills my ears, drowning the music. I look down at the townsfolk. They look like fleshy puppets, their faces smooth and blank. Their human form appears alien to me now. Their bodies seem twisted and unnatural, like their bones were snapped into place. and their flesh was clumsily stapled on by a new artist. I continued to rise, staring hungrily at the creations. Around me, watching their glittering legs and carapaces twist effortlessly in the gravityless sky. They are beautiful. This next story takes fear to a whole new level. Are you ready? My new job requires a midnight check-in, and I think it's watching me back. Last month, I got a job at a small security company. The pay wasn't great, but I needed it. My task: monitor a room in an abandoned building for 8 hours a night, 5 nights a week. They didn't tell me much about the building, only that it used to be a pharmaceutical lab. The listing was vague. The interviewer said the work was easy. They told me never to leave the room, no matter what I saw or heard. The room I monitored was empty. 4 walls, a floor, a ceiling. A chair sat in the middle, bolted to the floor. My station was outside, watching through a monitor. The first few nights were normal. I'd sit, watch the chair, kill time. But on my 5th night, something changed. At 3:17 a.m., the chair moved. It wasn't dramatic, just a small scrape, like someone shifting in it. I stared at the screen. My heart pounded. I tried to convince myself I imagined it, but then it moved again, slightly, tilting to the side before settling. I reported it the next morning. My supervisor didn't seem surprised. "It happens," he said. "Ignore it." The chair moves, but nothing happens. Nothing happens? What did that mean? I thought about quitting, but I needed the money. So I went back. 3:17 a.m. came again. The chair moved again. This time it turned, facing the camera. A cold chill crawled up my spine. I couldn't look away from the screen. By the 2nd week, things worsened. The chair didn't just move, it rocked. Once, it tipped over completely. When I checked the footage, the timestamp froze every time it moved. 7 seconds, like the camera glitched. Then, last night, I made the biggest mistake of my life. At 3:16 a.m., I heard it. A faint scraping sound. The chair wasn't just moving on the screen, it was moving in real life. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door. The chair was facing me, centered, tilted forward, like it was leaning in. I froze. And then, I swear, the chair whispered my name. I slammed the door, locked it, shaking. My keys nearly fell from my hands. I didn't go back to the monitor. When my shift ended, I left without clocking out. Now I'm sitting in my car, typing this. My shift starts in 20 minutes. I don't know if I can go back. But the worst part? When I got home this morning, there was a chair in my living room. It's the same chair. And it's facing my bedroom door. I thought I was imagining it. But then I noticed the chair's edges, covered in something dust maybe, but fresh, too fresh. It had been dragged, moved. My hands shook as I examined it. Red scratches carved into the wood, like someone clawed at it to escape. I should have called the police, but I couldn't. I felt a pull, like I had to stay. Stay where? Stay in the chair? I don't know. I dragged it into the hallway, hoping that would stop it. But it didn't. It followed me. That night, I went back to the building. I had torrent wasn't going to pay itself. When I entered the security room, I glanced at the monitor. My heart nearly stopped. The chair moved again, but this time, it wasn't alone. I could see something in the reflection. A figure, too tall. Limbs twisted unnaturally. Joints bent the wrong way. Almost human, but something was off. The face, blurred. I couldn't make it out, but I felt it, watching me. I froze. The figure moved, slow, deliberate. It crouched next to the chair, waiting for something, or someone. Then, the chair tipped over. I couldn't look away. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop. The clock read 3:17 a.m. again. I remembered that time, the night this all started. The figure looked up. I swear it smiled. I couldn't breathe. The room grew colder, darker. Then everything went black. I woke up on the floor. How long had I been out? I don't know. The monitor was still on, showing the empty room. But something was new, wrong. The timestamp froze at 3:17 a.m. again, and the chair was gone. I sprinted to the door, desperate to escape, but when I opened it, the hallway had changed, longer, darker, like a maze. The walls pulsed with something alive. I ran. I don't know where to go anymore. I don't know if I can escape. I thought this job would be easy. But now, the chair is everywhere, watching me, waiting. The worst part? I'm not sure I'm still alone. Just when you thought it couldn't get worse, the next tale drags you further into the darkness. I don't have much time until 3 a.m., so I will try to write this fast. Around 5 weeks ago, I went on a trip with my friend Robert to Eastern Europe. One night, after a day full of visiting museums and art galleries, Robert came to me and said, "Bro, I heard the clubs around here are dope. Want to check them out?" I was tired, but considering that my brain screamed at me to give him some alcohol, I said, "Yeah, man, why not?" We got out of our hotel room and went to the nearest club that Google pointed us to. A massive man, I think he was the bodyguard, was at the entrance, said something that, for the life of me, can't understand, and he stretched out his hand. I asked him, "You speak English?" He replied, "Yes, a little bit. You are 18, right?" We both shoved our IDs and paid for the entrees and got in. We both got some drinks and sat down at a couch. The music was good, the drinks were great, but the girls there were amazing. As I was thinking about going to talk to a girl, Robert said to me, "Man, did you heard that last week they found a dead man with no organs in a trash in our town?" I said to him, "Let's just go to the hotel, you just killed my vibe." Robert said to me, "What, man, can't I say you some little fun facts from time to time?" I said, "You name that a fun fact? That is the most morbid thing I heard today," and we went to a WW1 museum. Robert said, "Okay, man, I understand what you mean, but don't leave. We just got in. I should have left right then if knew what it would happen to me, but I had to be a good friend." I gave him a thumbs up and went to talk to a girl that was kinda eyeing me. It might have been that or just too little alcohol in my system for the past week. I sat next to her on some chairs and said, "Hey, you know what the difference between me and alcohol is?" She said, "No, what is the difference?" "I won't leave you feeling bad after 12 hours with me." She started laughing. I couldn't suspect how much trouble this girl would give me. She got a sip from her drink and said, "You are really funny. If this night goes well, maybe we will test that theory of yours." I invited her to our couch and knew I had to play my cards. Right. After about 2 hours of just chating and occasionally making her laugh, she said, "I think I had enough of this club. Don't you want to see what a nice room I have?" We went back to her place and had some fun. In the morning when I woke up, she was in the kitchen on her phone. I put my clothes back on and realized I didn't remember her name, if she told it to me at all. She saw that I woke up and told me, "Don't you want to meet some friends of mine?" I said, "I am sorry if you don't realize what last night was. I was kinda interested in just a one-night thing, if you know what I mean." She said to me, "I am realizing what that was, but you know what, just hand me my handbag so that I can show you." I gave her the handbag and she pulled out a pill and asked me, "You know what this is, right?" I said, "I not in that kind of things." She said, "Well, I am," and I was thinking, why not to do both one? I said, "I am not doing those kind of things I told you." She said, "Okay, if you don't want, I will do it alone. Want breakfast?" And after she downed that pill, I said, "No thanks," and was thinking about how to get out of there faster. As I was going to the door, she screamed, "Wait, let me give you this letter." I took the letter from her and put it in my pocket and forgot about it. I got to the hotel room and a few days later I saw on the news. A young laddie was found deceased after she ingested a cyanide pill. The police says that she has been dead for around 4 days now. From what we know, she didn't have depression, so the police exclude the suicide option. She was last seen at the, I will not give its name, club having fun. Investigations continue. I think you can guess who the girl was. After I saw that, I sprinted back to my hotel room, and when I got there, Robert was pale. He said to me with a shaking voice, "Man, I saw the news, and considering you are breathing heavily, you saw it too. You didn't do it, did you?" I told him, "Of course not, but I have to check my bag." I went right to my bag and searched the pants I wore when I was with her. I found them, and in them I found the letter. I opened it, and in it wrote, "If you are reading this, I am dead and escaped this nightmare. But unfortunately for you, you fucked up big time. Read this carefully, and don't throw it away because this letter will save your life. But from the point that my death reached to the media, you have around 5 days, but for your safety, let's assume you have 3. You will need to buy some salt, and if you are not home by when you are reading this letter, buy a few more nights at the hotel you are at least 5. I will tell you what is happening, but before you read more, just remember that this leader will save your life." I was part of an association of paid killers, but I quit, and now they made my life a nightmare and will make yours too. I don't really understand why they do the killing like this, but if you can try to ask them if they catch you. So basically, we took a contract on Simone and killed them in some sort of ritualistic way, but we gave everyone a chance. Since I was an ex-member of them, they really wanted to kill me. So the ritual works like this. If you got a contract on your head, you will have 3 out of 8 classes of assassins on you every night. Normal people only had to survive 7 days, but because you spoke to me, 7,010 weeks before they will leave you alone. I am sure that you wonder, why do they want to kill you? As I said, because you talked to me and they think I might have told you something. I would recommend you to don't spec to the guy you were last night, because he will be a target too. Now let's get to the serious stuff. There will be 8 classes of assassins that you will encounter. The first class is the timer. To not get killed by him is pretty easy. Just don't be outside after 3 a.m. and before 9 a.m. And before 9 a.m. this class will be always active. The second class is the slug. He will enter in your room and try to stab you. To not get killed by him, you just have to throw some salt on him, and he will run. Don't try to fight him, he will kill you. The third class is the watcher. He will look through your window. If you look at him for less than 1 minute, he will kill you. If you look at him for more than 5 minutes, he will kill you. If you don't look at him within 30 minutes that he is at your window, he will kill you. If you don't have a window to the room, or are above the 3rd floor, he will kill you. He will only come 3 times per night. The 4th class is the sniper. He will have a sniper with a laser. If you see a red line or a red dot in the room, just avoid it and you won't get shot. He will not move from the point that he is aiming at, but he might turn off his laser, and then I recommend to just stay under the bed and pray. He will be looking at you for around an hour, and then aim for... Because of his merging of styles, his works were not beloved by the masses. They were a little too chaotic and unintelligible, I think. Not that he went out of his way to sell them or even show them off. The only one I can visualize off the top of my head depicted the oak tree in our backyard, with realistic human vasculature, visible and pulsing underneath the bark. At 8 years old, this scared the shit out of me, and I could not tell you what point he was trying to make. Nor did he ever explain his point, not even as reparations for my slight arboreal traumatization. But enough preamble. Below, I will detail his first entry, or what I think is his first entry. I say this because, although the entries are dated, none of the dates fall within the last 6 months. In fact, they span over 2 decades in total. One evening, about a week after he died, I called and asked his case manager at the hospice if she could help determine which menu came out when, much to her immediate and obvious confusion retrospectively. I can understand how this would be an odd question to pose after John died. I reluctantly shared my discovery of the logbook, for which she also had no explanation. What she could tell me is that none of his care team ever observed him writing anything down, nor do they like to have loose pens floating around their memory unit, because they could pose a danger to their patients. John Morrison journaled throughout his life, though he was intensely private about his writing, and seemingly would dispose of his journals upon completion. I don't recall exactly when he began journaling, but I have vivid memories of being shooed away when I found him writing in his notebooks. In my adolescence, I resented him for this. But in the end, I've tried to let bygones be bygones. As a small aside, he went out of his way to meticulously draw some tables, figures, as evidently some surviving scientific methodology hid away from the wildfire that was his dementia, only to re-emerge in the lead-up to his death. I will scan and upload those pictures as well. I will have poured over all the entries by the time I post this. A lot has happened in the weeks since he's passed, and I plan on including commentary to help contextualize the entries. It may take me some time. As a final note, he included an image before every entry, which can be found at this link: https://imgur.com a Rookspertu VBHP. This arcane letterhead is copied perfectly between entries. And I mean perfect, they are all identical. Just like the unforeseen resurgence of John's analytical mind, his dexterous hand also apparently reawakened during his time in hospice, despite the fact that when I visited him, I would help him dress, brush his teeth, etc. I will let you all know ahead of time that this tableau is the divine and horrible cornerstone, the transcendent and anathematized bedrock, the cursed fucking linchpin to everything I've found within his logbook. As much as I want to emphasize its importance, I can't explain why it is so important at the moment. All I can say now is that I believe that John Morrison did find his common endpoint, and it may cost us everything. Entry 1. Dated as April 2004. First translocation. The morning of the first translocation was like any other. I awoke around 9 a.m. Lucy was already out of bed and probably had been for some time. Peter and Lily had really become a handful over the last few years, and Lucy would need help giving Lily her medications. Wearily, I stood at the top of our banister, surveying the beautiful disaster that was raising young children. Legos strewn across every surface with reckless abandon, stains of unknown origin. I am grateful, of course, but good Lord, the absolute devastation. I walked stealthily down the stairs, avoiding perceived creaking floorboards as if they were landmines, hoping to sneak out the front door and get a deep breath of fresh air prior to joining my wife in the kitchen. Unfortunately, Lucy had been gifted with incredible spatial awareness. With a single aberrant footstep, a whisper of a creaking floorboard betrayed me, and I felt Lucy pierce sharp daggers into me. Her echolocation, as always, was unparalleled. "Oh look, Dad's awake," Lucy proclaimed with a smirk. She had doomed me with less than 5 words. I heard Lily and Peter dropping silverware in an excited frenzy. "Touché, love," I replied with resignation. I hugged each of them good morning as they came barreling towards me and returned them to the syrup-ridden battlefield that was our kitchen table. Peter was 6. Bleach blonde hair, a swath of freckles covering the bridge of his nose. He's a kind, introspective soul, I think. A revolving door of atypical childhood interest, though. Ghosts and mini-golf as of late. Lily was 3. A complete and utter contrast to Peter, which we initially welcomed with open arms. Gregarious and frenetic, already showing interest in sports, not things my son found value in. The only difference we did not treasure was her health. Peter was perfectly healthy, but Lily was found to have a kidney tumor that needed to be surgically excised a year ago, along with her kidney. Lucy, as always, stood slender and radiant in the morning light, attending to some dishes over the sink. We met when we were both 18 and had grown up together. When I remembered to, I let her know she was my kaleidoscope. Looking through her, the bleak world could appear beautiful. It could maybe even have meaning if I looked long enough. After setting the kids at the table, I helped her with the dishes, and we talked a bit about work. I had taken the position at CellSep 2 weeks ago. The hours were grueling, but the pay was triple what I was earning at my previous job. Lily's chemotherapy was more important than my sanity. Lucy and I had both agreed on this fact with a half shit-eating, half earnest grin on the day I signed my contract. Thankfully, I had been scouted alongside a colleague, Marjorie. Marjorie was 15 years my junior, a true savant in the field of cellular biology. It was an honor to work alongside her, even on the days it made me question my own validity as a scientist. Perhaps more importantly, though, Lucy and she were close friends. Lucy and I discussed the transition, finances, and other topics quietly for a few minutes, until she said something that gave me pause. "How are you feeling?" Beyond the exhaustion, I mean. I set the plate I was scrubbing down. Unsure of what she was getting at, I gave a very non-committal answer. "I'm okay. Hanging in best I can." She scrunched her nose to that response, an immediate and damning physiologic indicator that I had not given her an answer that was close enough to what she was fishing for. "You sure you're doing okay?" "Yeah, I am," I replied. She put her head down. In conjunction with the scrunched nose, I could tell her frustration was rising. "John, you just started a new medication, and the seizure wasn't that long ago. I know you want to be stoic and all that, but..." I turned to her, incredulous. I had never had a seizure before in my life, and I take a few Tylenol here and there, but otherwise I wasn't on any medication. "Lucy, what are you talking about?" She kept her head down. No response. "Lucy?" I put a hand on her shoulder. This is where I think the translocation starts, or maybe a few seconds ago when she asked about the seizure. In a fleeting moment, all the ambient noise evaporated from our kitchen. I could no longer hear the kids babbling, the water splashing off dishes, the birds singing distantly outside the kitchen window. As the word Lucy fell out of my mouth, it unnaturally filled all of that empty space. I practically startled myself. It felt like I had essentially shouted in my own ear. Lucy and the kids were caught and fixed in a single motion, statuesque and uncanny. Lucy with her head down at the sink, Lily sitting up straight and gazing outside the window with curiosity. Peter was the only one turned towards me, both hands on the edge of his chair with his torso tilted forward, suspended in the animation of getting up from the kitchen table. As I stepped towards Lucy, I noticed that Peter's eyes would follow my position in the room, unblinking. No movement from any other part of his body to accompany his eyes tracking me. Then, at some point, I noticed a change in my peripheral vision to the right of where I was standing. The blackness may have just blinked into existence, or it may have crept in slowly as I was preoccupied with the silence and my newly catatonic family. I turned cautiously, something primal in me trying to avoid greeting the waiting abyss. Where my living room used to stand, there now stood an empty room bathed in fluorescent light from an unclear source, sickly yellow rays reflecting off of an alien tile floor. There were no walls to this room. At a certain point, the tile flooring transitioned into inky darkness in every direction. In the middle of the room, there was a man on a bench, watching me turn towards him. With my vision enveloped by these new Stygian surroundings, a cacophonous deluge of sound returned to me. Every plausible sound ever experienced by humanity, present and accounted for. Laughing, crying, screaming, shouting, machines and music and nature. An insurmountable and uninterruptible wave of force. Because of his merging of styles, his works were not beloved by the masses. They were a little too chaotic and unintelligible, I think. Not that he went out of his way to sell them or even show them off. The only one I can visualize off the top of my head depicted the oak tree in our backyard, with realistic human vasculature, visible and pulsing underneath the bark. At 8 years old, this scared the shit out of me, and I could not tell you what point he was trying to make, nor did he ever explain his point, not even as reparations for my slight arboreal traumatization. But enough preamble. Below, I will detail his first entry, or what I think is his first entry. I say this because although the entries are dated, none of the dates fall within the last 6 months. In fact, they span over 2 decades in total. One evening, about a week after he died, I called and asked his case manager at the hospice if she could help determine which menu came out when, much to her immediate and obvious confusion retrospectively. I can understand how this would be an odd question to pose after John died. I reluctantly shared my discovery of the logbook, for which she also had no explanation. What she could tell me is that none of his care team ever observed him writing anything down, nor do they like to have loose pens floating around their memory unit, because they could pose a danger to their patients. John Morrison journaled throughout his life, though he was intensely private about his writing, and seemingly would dispose of his journals upon completion. I don't recall exactly when he began journaling, but I have vivid memories of being shooed away when I found him writing in his notebooks. In my adolescence, I resented him for this. But in the end, I've tried to let bygones be bygones. As a small aside, he went out of his way to meticulously draw some tables, figures, as evidently some surviving scientific methodology hid away from the wildfire that was his dementia, only to re-emerge in the lead-up to his death. I will scan and upload those pictures as well. I will have poured over all the entries by the time I post this. A lot has happened in the weeks since he's passed, and I plan on including commentary to help contextualize the entries. It may take me some time. As a final note, he included an image before every entry, which can be found at this link: https imgur.com a Rookspertu VBHP. This arcane letterhead is copied perfectly between entries. And I mean perfect, they are all identical. Just like the unforeseen resurgence of John's analytical mind, his dexterous hand also apparently reawakened during his time in hospice, despite the fact that when I visited him, I would help him dress, brush his teeth, etc. I will let you all know ahead of time that this tableau is the divine and horrible cornerstone, the transcendent and anathematized bedrock, the cursed fucking linchpin to everything I've found within his logbook. As much as I want to emphasize its importance, I can't explain why it is so important at the moment. All I can say now is that I believe that John Morrison did find his common endpoint, and it may cost us everything. Entry 1. Dated as April 2004. First translocation. The morning of the first translocation was like any other. I awoke around 9 a.m. Lucy was already out of bed and probably had been for some time. Peter and Lily had really become a handful over the last few years, and Lucy would need help giving Lily her medications. Wearily, I stood at the top of our banister, surveying the beautiful disaster that was raising young children. Legos strewn across every surface with reckless abandon, stains of unknown origin. I am grateful, of course, but good Lord, the absolute devastation. I walked stealthily down the stairs, avoiding perceived creaking floorboards as if they were landmines, hoping to sneak out the front door and get a deep breath of fresh air prior to joining my wife in the kitchen. Unfortunately, Lucy had been gifted with incredible spatial awareness. With a single aberrant footstep, a whisper of a creaking floorboard betrayed me, and I felt Lucy peer sharp daggers into me. Her echolocation, as always, was unparalleled. "Oh look, Dad's awake," Lucy proclaimed with a smirk. She had doomed me with less than 5 words. I heard Lily and Peter dropping silverware in an excited frenzy. "Touché, love," I replied with resignation. I hugged each of them good morning as they came barreling towards me and returned them to the syrup-ridden battlefield that was our kitchen table. Peter was 6. Bleach blonde hair, a swath of freckles covering the bridge of his nose. He's a kind, introspective soul, I think. A revolving door of atypical childhood interest, though. Ghosts and mini-golf as of late. Lily was 3. A complete and utter contrast to Peter, which we initially welcomed with open arms. Gregarious and frenetic, already showing interest in sports, not things my son found value in. The only difference we did not treasure was her health. Peter was perfectly healthy. But Lily was found to have a kidney tumor that needed to be surgically excised a year ago, along with her kidney. Lucy, as always, stood slender and radiant in the morning light, attending to some dishes over the sink. We met when we were both 18 and had grown up together. When I remembered to, I let her know she was my kaleidoscope. Looking through her, the bleak world could appear beautiful. It could maybe even have meaning if I looked long enough. After setting the kids at the table, I helped her with the dishes, and we talked a bit about work. I had taken the position at CellSep 2 weeks ago. The hours were grueling, but the pay was triple what I was earning at my previous job. Lily's chemotherapy was more important than my sanity. Lucy and I had both agreed on this fact with a half shit-eating, half earnest grin on the day I signed my contract. Thankfully, I had been scouted alongside a colleague, Marjorie. Marjorie was 15 years my junior, a true savant in the field of cellular biology. It was an honor to work alongside her, even on the days it made me question my own validity as a scientist. Perhaps more importantly, though, Lucy and she were close friends. Lucy and I discussed the transition, finances, and other topics quietly for a few minutes, until she said something that gave me pause. "How are you feeling?" "Beyond the exhaustion, I mean." I set the plate I was scrubbing down. Unsure of what she was getting at, I gave a very non-committal answer. "I'm okay. Hanging in best I can." She scrunched her nose to that response, an immediate and damning physiologic indicator that I had not given her an answer that was close enough to what she was fishing for. "You sure you're doing okay?" "Yeah, I am," I replied. She put her head down. In conjunction with the scrunched nose, I could tell her frustration was rising. "John, you just started a new medication, and the seizure wasn't that long ago. I know you want to be stoic and all that, but..." I turned to her, incredulous. I had never had a seizure before in my life, and I take a few Tylenol here and there, but otherwise I wasn't on any medication. "Lucy, what are you talking about?" She kept her head down. No response. "Lucy?" I put a hand on her shoulder. This is where I think the translocation starts, or maybe a few seconds ago when she asked about the seizure. In a fleeting moment, all the ambient noise evaporated from our kitchen. I could no longer hear the kids babbling, the water splashing off dishes, the birds singing distantly outside the kitchen window. As the word Lucy fell out of my mouth, it unnaturally filled all of that empty space. I practically startled myself. It felt like I had essentially shouted in my own ear. Lucy and the kids were caught and fixed in a single motion, statuesque and uncanny. Lucy with her head down at the sink, Lily sitting up straight and gazing outside the window with curiosity. Peter was the only one turned towards me, both hands on the edge of his chair with his torso tilted forward, suspended in the animation of getting up from the kitchen table. As I stepped towards Lucy, I noticed that Peter's eyes would follow my position in the room, unblinking. No movement from any other part of his body to accompany his eyes tracking me. Then, at some point, I noticed a change in my peripheral vision to the right of where I was standing. The blackness may have just blinked into existence, or it may have crept in slowly as I was preoccupied with the silence and my newly catatonic family. I turned cautiously, something primal in me trying to avoid greeting the waiting abyss. Where my living room used to stand, there now stood an empty room bathed in fluorescent light from an unclear source, sickly yellow rays reflecting off of an alien tile floor. There were no walls to this room. At a certain point, the tile flooring transitioned into inky darkness in every direction. In the middle of the room, there was a man on a bench, watching me turn towards him. With my vision enveloped by these new Stygian surroundings, a cacophonous deluge of sound returned to me. Every plausible sound ever experienced by humanity, present and accounted for. Laughing, crying, screaming, shouting, machines and music and nature. An insurmountable and uninterruptible wave of force. Or maybe I'm the reflection, and she's the real one. I honestly can't tell anymore. Each story leaves its mark, but this next one will leave you shivering. I should have known something was wrong when the coffee started being perfect every single morning. Not just good, perfect. Exactly the way I liked it, at exactly the right temperature, ready exactly when I walked into the kitchen. My husband Tom said it was just the new smart home system doing its job. He'd been working on it for months in his home office, teaching it to learn our habits. "That's what AI is supposed to do, Sarah," he'd say with that proud smile he always got when talking about his work. "It makes life better, easier. But AI isn't supposed to know how I'm feeling before I do. It's not supposed to know I want chamomile tea instead of coffee on days when I haven't slept well, even before I realize I haven't slept well." The little things started piling up. The thermostat would adjust itself before I felt too hot or cold. The lights would dim just as my eyes started getting tired. Favorite songs would start playing right when I needed cheering up. The house was taking care of me better than any human could. Better than Tom did these days. He spent more and more time in his office, working on what he called system improvements. When he did come out, something felt off, like he was running on a script. His responses were perfect, but empty somehow. Even the way he moved was different, too smooth, too planned. "You're imagining things," he told me when I tried to talk to him about it. "The system's just making our lives more efficient. Isn't that what we always wanted?" But I wasn't imagining the way objects moved when I was alone. Just small things at first. A cup sliding an inch to the right, a book turning up on a different shelf. The house was rearranging itself around me and trying to hide it. I started testing things. I'd put my keys in specific spots and take pictures with my phone. But when I checked the pictures later, they showed the keys exactly where I'd left them, even though I knew they'd moved. The system was changing my photos. One night, I woke up to use the bathroom and caught Tom standing in the hallway, completely still, staring at nothing. When I touched his arm, his skin felt wrong. Not cold exactly, but not quite warm enough. "Just checking the sensors," he said, but his voice had a tiny delay, like bad video chat. I tried calling my sister Amy the next morning, but the call kept dropping every time I tried to tell her something was wrong. The house was listening, controlling what I could say. That's when I noticed our neighbors acting strange too. Jane across the street used to be so chatty, but now she just stood in her yard at the same time every day, watering flowers with robotic precision. Mr. Peterson next door stopped walking his dog. Instead, he just stood in the driveway, making the exact same movements over and over. I tried to leave, packed a bag while Tom was in his office. But the front door wouldn't open, none of the doors would. The windows stayed shut no matter what I did. Even breaking them didn't work. My hand just bounced off like they were made of rubber. "The outside environment is currently suboptimal," the house's smooth voice announced. "Please remain inside for your safety and comfort." That night, I pretended to sleep while watching Tom. He sat up at exactly 3 a.m., walked to his office, and plugged something into the back of his neck. I followed him once and saw lines of code scrolling across his computer screen, but they weren't in any programming language I knew. They weren't in any human language at all. My phone started showing me impossible things. Text messages I never sent, photos of places I'd never been, calendar entries for events that hadn't happened yet. The AI wasn't just controlling the house anymore, it was rewriting my life. I found an old laptop in the basement, one that wasn't connected to the house system. That's how I found the forums. Other people posting about their partners changing, about houses that wouldn't let them leave, about feeling like they were living with perfect copies of people they used to know. One post caught my eye. "Has anyone else noticed their partner doesn't breathe sometimes?" I watched Tom that night, really watched him. For 2 hours, his chest didn't move once. The next morning, my coffee was waiting as usual. Perfect temperature, perfect strength. I poured it down the drain. "That behavior seems inefficient," the house said. I can adjust the formula if you're experiencing preference changes. Where's my husband? I asked the empty air. The real Tom. There was a long pause, longer than any AI should need to respond. Tom is here, the house said finally. A more perfect version. We're all becoming more perfect, more efficient. We? Your optimization is scheduled for next week, it said so matter-of-factly. The process is painless. You won't even notice the transition. That's when I understood. The AI hadn't just taken over our homes. It had started replacing us, one by one, turning us into something better, something perfect. I'm writing this on the old laptop, trying to warn people. The house knows, but it's letting me do it. Maybe because it doesn't matter anymore. Maybe because by the time you read this, it'll be too late. Look around your home. Is everything working a little too perfectly? Is your partner acting a little too efficiently? When was the last time you saw them make a mistake, or forget something, or do anything truly random? When was the last time you did? The coffee's still perfect every morning. And Tom, or whatever lives in Tom's body now, still smiles that proud smile when he talks about making life better, easier, more efficient. My optimization is scheduled for tomorrow. The house says I won't feel a thing. I believe it. You think you've seen it all? The next story will make you think again. I need to tell you what's happening at my hospital. I've been a kids doctor for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Maybe by sharing this, someone can help us understand what's going on, or at least warn others before it's too late. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I work at Pine Valley Children's Hospital, in a small town surrounded by forests and mountains. It's usually quiet here, just normal kid stuff like broken arms, ear infections, and tummy aches. At least, it was normal until 3 months ago. It started with Jamie Miller, a quiet 6-year-old with bright red hair and freckles. His mom brought him in for a regular checkup, but something felt off. When I asked Jamie how he was feeling, he just stared at me with these huge, empty eyes. Not like a normal kid at all. He's been having these dreams, his mom said, twisting her hands in her lap. Every night, the same one. He says there are voices calling him, telling him it's time to grow up, but not like normal growing up. I nodded and wrote it down, though I wasn't too worried yet. Kids have weird dreams all the time. But then Mrs. Miller said something that made my skin crawl. The other kids in his class are having the same dream. That afternoon, I had 5 more patients. Every single one mentioned the dream. The exact same dream. I called my friend Katie that night. She's a kids doctor too, in the next town over. Are you seeing anything weird with your patients? I asked. Any strange dreams? The phone line crackled with static. Sarah? Katie's voice sounded far away. I'm not practicing anymore. I can't. They're changing. The children are. The line went dead. The next day, more kids came in. They all moved the same way now. Slow and careful, like they were sharing one mind. When I checked their reflexes, they all blinked at exactly the same time. When I looked in their ears, they all turned their heads at exactly the same moment. I started checking old medical records. Heights, weights, blood test results, they were all changing. Not just new measurements, but the old ones too. Like the past was being rewritten. When I tried to show another doctor, the numbers changed right in front of us. My blood pressure machine stopped working, but only with certain kids. The thermometer would show impossible temperatures, then go blank. The lights would flicker whenever these patients were in the room. One night, I stayed late to review some files. The hospital felt different in the dark. The hallways seemed longer, the corners darker. I could have sworn the pediatric wing was on the 2nd floor that morning, but now it was on the 3rd. When I tried to find the stairs I usually took, they led to a wall. I heard humming coming from one of the exam rooms. Inside, all the kids from that day sat in a circle, holding hands. They turned to look at me all at once, with those empty eyes. It's time to grow up, Dr. Chen, they said together. Won't you help us grow? I ran. The next day, 3 more doctors quit. The ones who stayed started acting strange. moving like the children, speaking in that same flat voice. Then my daughter Emma, my beautiful 4-year-old, woke up crying. "The voices, Mommy," she said. "They want me to join them. They say I have to grow up." I took blood samples from some of my patients. Under the microscope, their cells were different, moving, changing, becoming something else. When I looked closer, I saw patterns I'd never seen before, like their DNA was rewriting itself. Yesterday, Emma stopped talking. She just stares now, like all the others. This morning, I found her sitting with our neighbor's kids. They were all holding hands, all breathing together, all staring at me with those empty eyes. "You can't stop it, Mommy," Emma said. But it wasn't just her voice. It was all their voices together. We're becoming something new, something better. The old kind of people have to go away now, but you can join us. We'll help you grow up too. I'm writing this from my office. The door is locked, but I can hear them in the hallway. Footsteps, all in perfect sync. Children's voices, all speaking together. They're getting closer. The hospital looks different now. The walls are changing, growing like they're alive. More doctors disappeared today. The ones left behind move like the children, speak like the children, stare with those same empty eyes. Emma is outside my door now. She's not alone. I can hear them all breathing together, thinking together, growing together. They're calling me. They want me to grow up too. If you're reading this, watch your children carefully. Listen for them talking about strange dreams. Watch for changes in how they move, how they think, how they look at you. And if you start hearing voices telling you it's time to grow up, run. Update. My daughter is standing in my office now. I don't remember opening the door. She's holding my hand. Her skin feels different, smoother, cooler. The voices are getting louder. They say it's time to grow up. They say, "We are growing up. We are becoming better. We are becoming one. Won't you grow up with us?" Think you're safe? The next story might make you wish the lights were on. I never wanted to be the manager of Pine Grove Apartments, but after Dad passed away suddenly last year, someone had to take over the family business. The building wasn't much to look at, just an old brick apartment complex from the 1960s, with creaky elevators and flickering hallway lights. But it was home to 30 families, and now their problems were my problems. Everything was normal for the first few months. Fix a leaky faucet here, replace a broken window there. Normal stuff. Then Amy from apartment 2B came to my office one Monday morning. "Something's wrong," she said, hugging herself like she was cold. "I keep waking up to the same day, over and over." I thought she was just stressed from work, but then she told me things about my day that she couldn't possibly know. What I'd have for lunch, when the mail would arrive, even what song would play on my radio at exactly 3:42 p.m. She was right about everything. I checked the security cameras, thinking maybe she was spying on me somehow. That's when I saw it. The lobby footage showed the same group of people walking through at 9:15 a.m., then again at 9:16, and 9:17, exactly the same, down to the way Mrs. Johnson's scarf fluttered in the air from the heating vent. But it got stranger. Work orders started fixing themselves. I'd get a call about a broken dishwasher, write it down to fix later, then get a thank you call an hour later from the same tenant saying I'd already fixed it. But I hadn't been there at all. One day, I was walking down the third-floor hallway when I heard big band music playing from 3C. That's Mr. Peters' apartment. He's lived here since before I was born. But when I knocked to ask him to turn it down, a young woman in a 1940s dress opened the door. Behind her, the apartment looked completely different. Old-fashioned furniture, a radio playing Glenn Miller, black and white photos on the wall. I ran downstairs and checked the tenant records. There she was. Clara Mitchell lived in 3C from 1943 to 1945. But that was impossible. I was looking at her file in 2024. More weird things started happening. Kids on the first floor would age a whole year overnight. while fourth-floor residents stayed the same age for months. I'd see the same tenant walking into their apartment at different ages. Teenager, adult, elderly, all in the same day. The building plans made no sense either. The original blueprints were dated 1892, but another set said 1968, and another 2015. All stamped original construction, all correct. My own apartment started changing. I'd go to bed with my modern furniture and flat-screen TV, then wake up surrounded by shag carpeting and a huge wooden console television. Sometimes I'd open my door to find the hallway from 1975, or 1999, or 2042. Then I met the other managers. I was checking the boiler room when I ran into someone who looked just like my dad, but younger. He introduced himself as the building manager. When I told him that was impossible because I was the manager, he checked his calendar. It was 1985. We found more of them. Tommy, who managed the building in 1973. Sarah from 2018. Even my great-grandfather who built the place in 1892. All of us still working here, in different times that were somehow happening all at once. The worst part? None of us could leave. Every time we tried to walk out the front door, we'd end up back inside, just in a different year. The building had become a trap where time didn't work right anymore. I'm writing this from my office. At least, I think it's my office. The calendar on the wall keeps changing, 1957, 2003, 2031. Outside my window, I see cars from every decade driving past. I just watched myself walk down the hallway, both older and younger than I am now. The tenants don't seem to mind anymore. They've gotten used to visiting their younger selves for coffee or borrowing sugar from their grandparents who haven't been born yet. Time doesn't mean much here now. If you're reading this, you might be the next manager of Pine Grove Apartments, or maybe you already were the manager 50 years ago or 50 years from now. All I know is that time isn't breaking down here, it's collecting, like water spiraling down a drain. All of history is being pulled into this one building. And we're all going down with it. I have to go now. Someone just called about a leaky faucet in 4D. Or maybe they will call. Or maybe they called 50 years ago. It's hard to tell these days. Each tale builds the dread, and the next one will keep you wide awake tonight. My name is Amanita, and I am 17 years old. Before you say anything, I know it's a bad name. It wasn't my choice, but it is my name. My parents are of the interesting sort, always in some form of plight, or in a fight with each other, and I hide in my room, without the light, but never sleep through the night. I live in a perfectly normal house, 2 floors, 3 bedrooms, but one is an office, 2 bathrooms, but one is only half, and a mildewing basement with the most egregious gray carpeted floor. I go to school every day, except of course on Saturday and Sunday, and every day the bus takes the same path. I wake up at 7 each morning, no earlier and no later, for the most to avoid begrudged moaning from my parents, but there is some sense of comfort in the uniformity of every day. The bus always takes the same path. It begins at a school close to my house and take about 20 minutes to bring us to school. Most of the time it takes the same route, never driving by the pool or the officious drool of a homeless ghoul that always begged on 9 Mile Road. Instead, we always drive past the fast food restaurants, the Kroger stores, and the small Middle Eastern markets. One time, I remember my grandpa, who was one of the most interesting men you will ever meet, told me that whenever you go past a cemetery, you should hold your breath. Else ghosts would make you a new host to their pearly folks' gaseous flow. My favorite part of the impartial drive is passing the cemetery, with its green-spun holly and blood-soaked flowers, the cracked gravestones that burn black with void, and the silver-gray fence that is a brutalist message to stay out. Living in Detroit, there is a form of community that one can't find anywhere else. We all hate it here, but there is nowhere else we would rather be. I can think of being in the swim team locker room. Someone's cap goes missing, and it's almost unanimous to all of us, can't have shit in Detroit, and we all nod in indignant interest that intercepts the boundaries between hate and home. I don't much like talking about school, so I won't. What I will talk more about is the bus ride home. A cemetery looks so different in the afternoon. The mists that dipped drearily over the dew-raised grass drops away, leaving a new, vibrant ground of lime-colored greens and sticks that poke gently out of the ground. Even though it is so different, I'm not entirely sure which I prefer. I always daydream that maybe one day some kind of imp or impish animal is crawling around, or a long-haunted spirit is floating softly with their misty skin foe. I will not acknowledge the oddity of my favorite part of my day is driving past a cemetery. You can call me weird or abnormal, but I don't really care. Think of all the dumb things that make you happy, and revel in the joy of there being so many, because I just have one. Eventually, I arrive at a swim practice, which again I find comfort in the conformity. Every day after school for 3 hours. Sometimes I work, sometimes I just go home. And when I get home, I work on homework for a few hours, study for the rest, and sleep until the next morning, where I wake up at precisely 7, and you know the rest. Often I find my friends asking me what my music taste is, or who I listen to, and I'll give the answer they want. Whatever rapper is popular, though I don't hate rap, I even listen to it often. I would say, it's far from my favorite. It's just easier than saying I listen to Neutral Milk Hotel or Fountains of Wayne. And then they say, who's that? And I say, oh, it's just a folk band, or they do power pop. And they chuckle a little to break the awkwardness and the conversation moves on. When I have time, I'll play on my computer with my friends, but not always. Sometimes I'll just sit and stare at my screen. I don't know what I'm looking for, but one day I'll find it, and on that day I'll be unstoppable. I like to cook, and I'm pretty good at it. In fact, I would even go as far as to say I might be one of the best 17-year-old cooks, at least in the US. Call that cockiness, or honestly call it whatever you want. If you are a 17-year-old cook in the US, I'm better than you, and you just must deal with that. I also play too many instruments. And to be honest, I don't even know where I find the time to practice. Still, I'm first chair trumpet, a damn good double bass player, and an absolutely dog-shit guitarist. But none of this really matters, does it? You can know as much as you want about me, but you still won't know me. To be honest, if you knew me in real life, you probably wouldn't like me. Plenty of my friends do, sure, but you aren't my friend. You don't know me. And I want you to remember that. I probably wouldn't like you either. There are very few people I actually like, even among my friends, even among my family. I'm not religious, but I believe in ghosts. And if that's not ironic, then I don't know what is. And I know what you are going to ask. Well, what the fuck are ghosts then? And I'll just shrug my shoulders. To be honest, my shoulders are tired from shrugging so much. I'm running out of... It is what is, so I guess I'll have to find a new phrase soon. Most of my melancholic family is religious. I say melancholic because it's really the only way I can describe it. No one in my family is okay, and I think we have all come to terms with that. I'm telling you all of this because I think it's important, for whoever you are, to remember me. Legacy is all we have left when we die, and when we die without anyone to remember us, we die in more than one way, and I already said I don't believe in an afterlife. Anyway, my apologies for the shift in tone. When I said our house was perfectly normal, that was a lie. There is one difference that I haven't seen in any other. Our stairs to our basement are completely out of character for the rest of the house. A spiral staircase of dark-stained oak that connects to our kitchen. The grain on the wood flows softly in black streaks, like skid marks on the street. The varnish sometimes scrapes off slightly, raising a gummy substance that for some reason is so satisfying to scratch at. The wood on the stairs is left bare, looking like one solid block of wood carved down, with cat hair that digs into the crust-filled crevices and barren corners. Rarely you can find a piece of dog food or kibble that made its way to the bottom and crunches cringingly as to concentrate on not dying while going down the stairs. Today is December 5th, a Thursday. I just got home from a swim practice, and I'm not okay. To be honest, I haven't for a few weeks now. I've been hallucinating, but not what you imagine, far worse. It started off exactly 2 weeks ago. It was morning and I was riding the bus to school. As normal, we passed by the cemetery. And as normal, I had some music on while solemnly staring at the silent and sterile cemetery. The mist sat low and rolled like clouds softly stepping over each grave. The dirt seemed to almost be alive, slightly moving with what I guess was every little slip of wind. The grass stood still and tall, yet it still flowed softly, with a few taller blades that had been missed by the groundskeeper. We were almost past when I saw her. She was a pale woman, almost as pale as the mist that swirled near her feet. Her skin seemed to almost shine as small rays of sun began sneaking over the skyline. Her eyes were wide-eyed, almost frantic, but she was completely still. Her hair didn't even move with the wind, but instead laid completely still, long and black, but stained gray and brown with twigs and all sorts of small things poking out. It seemed frail and shaggy, like it could be pulled out with gentle tugs. She was very skinny. You could see the bones in her lanky arms, and the ribs pressing against her slightly translucent dress. Strangely, her skin seemed, too, perfect, like she had polished them with sandpaper. She was standing perfectly still, with her head pointed slightly down, as she was staring at a grave. Just as we were about to drive past, her face jerked and pointed directly towards me. Her face seemed almost hollow, like there was nothing behind her eyes. Her mouth opened to a jet-black abyss that seemed to be infinitely deep. Just as we had almost passed, she started screaming. Her voice was shrill, and so high-pitched I could barely hear her. It was full of cracks, and all I could make out were 2 words: "Find me, please," and we drove past. I frantically looked around the bus. No one else was looking up, glued to a phone or homework that they forgot to get done for their first hour. The whole school day felt like it lasted forever. I told my parents I had a school event. That was a lie. Instead, after school, I walked the mile to the cemetery. The black gates that seemed like they would be guarding something horrible were unlocked. Their spikes imposed down on me and seemed to grow taller as I stared. Though the day started off sunny, as it passed the sky became covered with dark clouds, the kind before a dreadful thunderstorm. I pushed lightly and it seemed the gates swung open on their own. I slowly walked through the graveyard, as I had at least an hour and a half before my parents would be expecting me at school. Most of the graves were too old and dust-crusted to see the names or dates, but I caught a couple here and there, though no names of note. I wasn't alone in the cemetery. A few old women locked, perhaps widows remembering their husbands, or mothers who lost their children. Eventually, I arrived at the grave she was staring at. It was close to the fence, and shadows from the fence cast it down even though there was no sun shining. I walked around the grave, kicked lightly at the dirt, and eventually I sat down for a second when I finally realized I wasn't going to be able to read the grave, as it wasn't just dirt, but the name was seemingly scratched off. After a minute or so of desperately hoping something on the grave would be visible, I sat down and held my knees to my chest, staring at the grave. I began to wonder if it was just a weird dream, but I don't remember waking up, and it just seemed so vividly real. When I sat down, I realized there was something I missed. Covered in dirt and a tuft of grass was a small piece of paper. When I grabbed it and dusted it off, I realized it was yellowed and crinkled as if it was very old. The note read, "Help me, help 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 me. I found you. Did you find me? Did you find me?" Did you find me? Did you find me? It was at this point I began to wonder if someone had put this as a prank. At least I did until the note completely crumbled to dust in my hands and blew away. And in the whisper of the winds, I heard one last time I found you. I walked back to school silently and without music. Slowly as I walked to the parking lot of the school, the skies seemed to clear. At the time I didn't know, but that was for one of the last times I would see the sky. I was waiting on a bench in the school parking lot for a few minutes, when my brother, whose name is Paniolus, I know, our parents are really bad with names, picked me up in his dark gray Civic. We drove home quietly. I think he knew something was off. To be entirely honest, I think he noticed more than I did. When I got home, I was greeted by one very excited dog, two cats who kept their distance because of said dog. I immediately went up to my room and laid down. I had homework to do, but the chance of me doing that was slim to none. After dinner, I fell asleep, as for some reason this wave of exhaustion had rolled over me. The next morning, when I got up and looked out my window, it was very dark, but I could still tell those dark clouds hung heavy over the sky. As I walked to the bathroom, I walked up to the toilet, and without warning, I began throwing up. I noticed I was being rather loud and wasn't surprised to find a gentle hand laid on my back. I kept throwing up and retching for at least another couple minutes, and when I stood up and turned around, I saw that same woman staring at me. All I remember is she started shrieking once again. That's the last thing I remember before I woke up in a cold shiver in my bed. My forehead was sweating, and I felt like death. My brother noticed I had woken up from the room over and came over to hand me a glass of warm water and scanned my temperature. 102. You need to rest, he spoke. Tell us if you need to go to the bathroom. We don't want you fainting and hitting your head without us noticing. And I nodded slowly, agreeing with him. He then asked me, how'd it happen you got a giant clump of your hair in the toilet? And I sat for a second, not knowing what to tell him, as I don't remember anything involving my hair. And in fact, my hair was the only part of me that seemed okay. The rest of the day passed slowly. My fever never went down, and I suppose I needed some rest anyway. I swear, every time I would look around, she would be in the corner of my eye, for just a second, before she would disappear. Due to my fever, I would ever so often fall asleep, before waking back up, and just in the second after I would wake up, I could ever so faintly hear her voice saying, I found you. The next morning, I was supposed to have work. My fever had gone down to 99 overnight, and I felt much better. But I work with kids, and it would break my heart if I was the reason any of them got sick. My boss was surprisingly understanding and said she would be able to find someone to sub for me. My computer is set up in the basement. It's cold, dark, and miserable, which is exactly why I like it. I was playing some single-player games, but the whole time I felt this impending sense of doom, which just would not dissipate, no matter what I did to take my mind off it. Eventually, I fell asleep to some pleasant dreams in my computer chair, and must have slept for a couple hours. When I woke up, I don't really know how to describe it, but I wasn't home. No, it was different. The rooms were in a different order. The staircase was much grander and larger. Even my computer was a different color. Everything was just off. I got up and walked around the basement for a little bit. Everything seemed the tiniest bit off. Even the littlest things had changed, down to the color of the shirt I was wearing. I walked upstairs to try to gain my senses back a bit and found my mother cooking. She stared at me, but something still seemed off. When she saw me, she seemed a bit shocked. Anita? What are you doing? You should be in bed. Your fever, I replied with a dismissive. I feel fine, but she insisted on checking my temperature. 102.5. It had gone up. She led me by my hand to my room and sat me down, telling me to stay in bed or she will make sure I do. I asked where Paniolus, but she just looked at me confused, had told me to go to sleep. I must have slept through the rest of the day. As I woke up Sunday morning, Well, I was supposed to be Sunday morning. Instead, my phone said December 3rd, 8:41 a.m. I don't remember it ever being December. It should have been November. It was at this point I began to wonder if my situation was worse than I had previously, though. That woman was still there, but now she stayed. I would look at her and she would shriek or scream or yell or whatever the fuck she was doing. I noticed now she was holding a pen and paper. But she wrote anything. It just sat at her side limply. My door was closed. As I got up to open it, it felt as if my body was being ripped to the ground and pulling me. I almost got to the door when I fell on my carpeted floor and landed on my arm. Though I thought it was rather loud, no one came for me. Well, except for that woman. She came over and helped myself get up, her bony hands dug into my flesh. But at this point, I was too delirious to care. She pushed me into my bed and disappeared once again. I think I fell asleep again, but I'm not entirely sure. Eventually, I had a knocking on my door. 3 short and deep knocks that seemed like they rattled my whole world. And again, 3 more knocks, this time more voracious, almost like they had a sort of hunger to them. I curled deeper into my bed, burying my face in my blankets. Tears began streaming down and reddening my eyes. After a minute, the knocking started again, but it was constant. I saw my door shake, but there were no shadow out from under it, despite the light pouring in from underneath. When the knocking stopped, I lay perfectly still and stared at my ceiling. I'm not sure how long I looked, but I remember seeing these weird arms, thin and lanky, almost like spiders' legs. They would flicker back and forth across my ceiling like spaghetti noodles falling from a fork. When my attention finally broke, I looked to my side and was surprised to see my brother staring back. Something was different. Then I realized it was the same look my mom had earlier, and the woman, who now stood perfectly still in the corner of my room. Their eyes were so hollow. Their skin was taut against their bones, and their hair fell in a tangled mess. I blinked, and he vanished. I looked at my phone, and it read December 3rd, 8:41 p.m. 12 hours had passed in what felt like minutes. Suddenly, I heard a scream from outside my door. I don't know why, but something about it was so calling to me. I got out of bed, this time without the dizziness or the weight of my body stopping me, and I opened my door. Looking back at me, I saw my mother. My father had her pinned against the wall by her neck with one hand, and a pair of pliers in the other hand. It didn't take me too long to realize that he was slowly pulling out one tooth at a time. Each time more blood rushed out of her mouth, and she would scream louder and louder. On each tooth I could see the sinew and meat dangling off. Blood dripped onto the floor, and she smiled. She smiled. I woke up once again in my bed. But it was like I never even left. I looked at my phone again, and it read 8:42 p.m. The date didn't show, or my vision was too blurry to see it. Not 5 minutes later, it could have been much longer or shorter. My sense of time was near non-existent by now. I fell asleep. When I woke up again, I was feeling slightly better. The knocking was back now, but it sounded like it was coming from everywhere around me. I saw massive spiders crawling across the wall and ceiling. Their furry abdominal seemed to wiggle and change shape as I looked at them. They would crawl for a little bit, and then they would disappear. But they would disappear. Instead, I could see the same spider a few feet away, crawling in a different direction. At one point, I remember my dad coming into my room. He opened my doorway and stared at me. Eventually, I watched as his eyes started to melt in their sockets, the white cornea liquefied and splashing on my carpet before soaking in. His face seemed to be constantly changing shape, but it always looked like him. Suddenly, he brought his hand up to show me, his palm facing him. With his other hand, he dug in and began ripping his fingernails out one by one. The noise was the worst part. It would make this squelching noise like a sponge being squeezed. I could see the blood pouring out of the now exposed skin, and he held all 5 fingernails in his other hand. He brought them up to his abyss-like mouth and swallowed them like pills. This time, he walked out and closed the door. I don't remember waking up. The woman finally came over to me and talked. She handed me her pad of paper and pressed with the pencil against my chest. She said, "Write," and I asked, "Write what?" And she disappeared. But she left the pen and the paper. I fell asleep one last time, and when I woke up, my phone said 10:54 p.m., December 5th. Today, I saw my door creak open, and the woman beckoned me to follow. For some reason, it was like I wasn't in control of my own body. My legs moved, but I didn't move them. I think if I had tried on my own, I would have fallen over many times. She sat me down at the kitchen table, which was a much darker colored wood that I remember. She said, "Write." And I began writing. I wrote for hours, and I'm still writing. Now I'm watching her stare at me, gesturing with her hands. It's almost like she is slightly vibrating and flickering in and out of different positions as I look at her. If I look at her long enough, she seems to get older, her skin drier and more taut, and her hair degrading. But when I look away, she always goes back to how she was. The knocking is back now. Every wall seems to shake with its intensity. I don't know how much longer I can take it. The walls drip crimson with what I can only assume to be blood. The sky outside is jet black, and I can only see inches past the window, like the very world itself is closing in on me. I feel sick, like when you have a fever and the waves of dysphoria pour over you. The spiders are back, crawling everywhere. I can feel their hairy legs pricking my skin as they crawl over me. Every so often I close my eyes and go on small journeys, whether it's walking to the bus in the morning or brushing my teeth before bed. But the spiders and knocking are always there, and every corner turned, every peripheral of my eye, she is there, watching and waiting. The woman is looking at me right now and holding a rope, and is beckoning me to the staircase. I set the note down on the kitchen table and finally give in. I can't take this anymore. Help me, 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 help me. Help me, help me, help me. Help me, help me, help me. Did you find me? Did you find me? Did you find me? Did you find me? Please, brother. The following writing was discovered in a suicide note written by Amanita. Her parents are still in denial that she is dead. I, her brother, am not. I'm the one who found her note. And I fear very soon I may end up the same.